Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. From mysterious lights in the night sky to unexplainable temporal anomalies, a remote weather station in northern Alaska has been described as an epicenter of supernatural phenomena. Even the most skeptical minds have found themselves questioning reality when confronted with the inexplicable events that occur at this isolated location. This is the story of the abandoned Talking to Weather Station. The vast wilderness of Alaska, particularly the region surrounding Talking to, has long been considered one of the most active paranormal hotspots in North America. Strange lights dance across the sky, shadowy figures move through the dense forests, and time itself seems to behave differently in these remote areas. According to local surveys, 3 out of every 4 residents in this region have experienced something they cannot explain. For those just passing through, there's an unmistakable sensation that the snow-covered landscape and dark forests harbor secrets beyond human understanding. While unusual occurrences are reported throughout the region, some believe there exists an epicenter from which all these phenomena emanate, a 320-acre property that housed an old weather station, situated about 70 miles north of Talking to. Local Inuit elders speak of this land in hushed tones. According to their ancestral knowledge, the property lies at the intersection of what they call spirit paths, ancient routes used by supernatural entities to travel between worlds. Their folklore warns against settling in this area, claiming that those who do risk attracting the attention of powerful forces beyond human comprehension. For decades, the weather station had been operated by a rotating staff of meteorologists, until one day in 1987, when the entire team vanished without a trace. Their disappearance was never solved, and the station remained abandoned for 7 years, its equipment silent and its buildings slowly decaying in the harsh Alaskan weather. That changed in 1994 when Michael and Emily Anderson, along with their 2 children, purchased the property. Michael, a former meteorologist himself, saw an opportunity to combine his expertise with his dream of running a private research station. The price was surprisingly low, far below market value, and Michael could hardly believe his luck when he signed the papers. The main building needed significant repairs after years of abandonment. But what truly caught the Andersons' attention were the unusual security measures left behind by the previous occupants. Every door and window was secured with multiple heavy-duty locks. The entrance had reinforced steel bars, and they found an elaborate camera system that seemed designed to monitor something far more dangerous than ordinary wildlife. Even more puzzling were the strange conditions in the purchase agreement. The previous owners had insisted on several unusual clauses, including one that prohibited any excavation on the property without prior written approval. While these oddities raised some concerns, the Andersons dismissed them as paranoid precautions against the harsh Alaskan environment. Their first hint that something was truly amiss came on moving day. As they unloaded their truck in the crisp morning air, Liam, their 15-year-old son, spotted something massive moving through the trees. At first, they assumed it was a normal polar bear, but as the creature emerged into the clearing, they realized this was something entirely different. The bear stood at least 12 feet tall, nearly twice the size of the largest recorded polar bear. Its fur was pure white, but seemed to shimmer with an almost metallic quality in the winter sun. Most striking were its eyes. They glowed with an intelligent, almost human-like awareness that sent chills down Michael's spine. Instead of charging or showing aggression, the bear approached with an almost casual demeanor, as if it were examining them. Emily's father, who had come to help with the move, watched in astonishment as the massive creature came within 50 yards of their position. The bear's behavior was so unusual that Michael began to wonder if it might be someone's trained animal, though he knew this was impossible given their remote location. The situation changed in an instant when the bear's attention shifted to their weather monitoring equipment. Before anyone could react, the massive creature bounded toward their expensive atmospheric measurement device. Michael, running on instinct, grabbed his hunting rifle from the truck. The first shot hit the bear square in the shoulder, a kill shot that should have dropped any normal animal. Instead, the creature barely flinched. 3 more shots followed, each hitting their mark, but the bear showed no signs of injury. No blood appeared on its shimmering white coat. The beast finally released the equipment and took several steps back, but its retreat was unhurried, almost contemptuous. As it moved away, Michael noticed something bizarre. Pieces of the bear's fur seemed to be falling off, but instead of landing in the snow, they disappeared into thin air. Michael and Liam followed the bear's tracks through the snow, determined to ensure it left their property. The tracks led them through a dense grove of black spruce trees, before suddenly ending in the middle of an open clearing. There was no possible way for such a massive creature to disappear without leaving more tracks. Yet that's exactly what had happened. When they returned to the spot where the bear had damaged their equipment, Michael found something that defied explanation. Where the animal's fur had seemed to fall, they found small patches of a substance that looked like fur, but felt like metal and was burning hot to the touch despite the freezing temperature. This encounter was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Emily began experiencing strange phenomena inside the station. She would carefully organize their research data, only to find all the papers back in their original boxes moments later. Important equipment would vanish, only to reappear days later in impossible locations, like their main barometer being found 30 feet up in a tree, completely frozen in a block of ice that couldn't have formed naturally. The most disturbing incidents involved time itself. Clocks throughout the station began showing different times, despite being synchronized each morning. Digital timestamps on their atmospheric readings would show data being recorded hours or even days before the equipment was installed. Emily once spent an entire morning analyzing weather patterns, only to find her computer showed she had logged in 2 days later. As winter deepened, the phenomena intensified. The northern lights above their property began behaving strangely, forming perfect geometric patterns and pulsing in sequences that seemed almost like code. They recorded electromagnetic readings that their equipment shouldn't have been capable of detecting, and their satellite communication system picked up transmissions that seemed to be in no known language. Michael spent countless nights observing these anomalies, trying to document them scientifically. One evening, he witnessed something that challenged everything he understood about physics. A dark object, about the size of a small car, moved silently across their property. It resembled a piece of the night sky, a perfect absence of light that moved with clear purpose and intelligence. He observed it through their best atmospheric monitoring equipment, which showed that the air temperature around the object dropped to physically impossible levels. The object moved methodically across their property, as if searching for something, before suddenly stopping and orienting itself toward Michael's position. In that moment, every electronic device on the property went dead, and Michael felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched by something ancient and powerful. The final straw came when their children's safety was threatened. One night, both Liam and Megan woke screaming, claiming that something cold and dark had tried to pull them through their bedroom walls. The next morning, they found their children's rooms covered in a layer of ice on the inside, despite the heating system running at full power. Emily discovered that previous meteorologists had documented similar phenomena, but all official records of their reports had been deleted or classified. Local pilots reported that their instruments would fail when flying over the property, and hunters told stories of game animals that would vanish into thin air when pursued into the area. The situation reached its breaking point when they lost contact with the outside world for 3 days. When communications finally returned, their equipment showed that 3 weeks had passed everywhere else, though they had only experienced 3 days. Their children's homework was now weeks overdue. Emily had missed important deadlines for her art commissions, and their scientific data was hopelessly corrupted with impossible timestamps. That's when Dr. Richard Hawkins, founder of the Institute for Anomalous Research Phenomena, IARP, contacted them. He had been monitoring their situation through various scientific channels and offered to purchase the property for his institute's research. The Andersons, now physically and mentally exhausted from their ordeal, agreed to sell. By July 1996, the Andersons had relocated to a peaceful suburb of Anchorage, trying to rebuild their lives and understand their experiences. Dr. Hawkins's team moved in by September, armed with millions of dollars worth of specialized equipment and a mandate to uncover the truth behind the phenomena. The IARP researchers would spend the next 8 years at the station, documenting hundreds of inexplicable events. Their findings would challenge our understanding of reality, suggesting that this remote Alaskan weather station might be more than just a hotspot of paranormal activity. It could be a window into something far stranger and more profound than anyone had imagined. As for the Andersons, they never returned to the weather station, but the mysteries they encountered there would haunt them forever. Their story serves as a reminder that in the vast wilderness of Alaska, there are some phenomena that defy all rational explanation, some boundaries that perhaps humans were never meant to cross. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. In March 1996, while the Anderson family was considering abandoning their remote Alaskan weather station, Doctor. Richard Hawkins was assembling what would become the Institute for Anomalous Research Phenomena, IARP. This groundbreaking organization represented the first time a private research group had received substantial funding to investigate unexplained phenomena using rigorous scientific methodology. The IARP team consisted of distinguished scientists holding doctoral degrees in fields ranging from quantum physics and atmospheric sciences to advanced electronics and cognitive psychology. Dr. Hawkins carefully selected researchers who maintained healthy skepticism while remaining open to unexpected discoveries. The core team included Dr. Sarah Williams, a quantum physicist, Dr. James Norton, a meteorological specialist and doctor, Marcus Thompson, an expert in electromagnetic phenomena. When news of the strange occurrences at the Talkington weather station reached Dr. Hawkins through scientific channels, he immediately recognized an unprecedented opportunity. Here was a location where multiple types of unexplained phenomena occurred regularly. The perfect natural laboratory for their research. By late summer 1996, the IARP team had met with the Andersons. After hearing their incredible story, Dr. Hawkins offered to purchase the property. While Emily and the children were eager to leave, Michael struggled with the decision. His scientific curiosity made him reluctant to abandon the investigation, even though the phenomena had nearly destroyed his family. Eventually, Michael proposed a compromise. He would stay on as a scientific consultant, lending his meteorological expertise to the IARP team while his family relocated to safety in Anchorage. Dr. Hawkins readily agreed, recognizing the value of having someone familiar with both the property and its strange occurrences. By September, IARP had transformed the weather station into a state-of-the-art research facility. They installed advanced monitoring equipment worth millions of dollars, including thermal cameras, electromagnetic sensors, gravitational anomaly detectors, and a network of automated weather stations. The facility was staffed around the clock by rotating teams of researchers. Their first priority was to rule out conventional explanations. They tested for everything from naturally occurring electromagnetic fields and geological anomalies to atmospheric phenomena and psychological factors. Every test came back negative, suggesting something far more exotic was at work. The team's first major incident occurred in March 1997. A brand new atmospheric monitoring station, installed just that morning, was found completely disassembled 45 minutes after its activation. Every component had been precisely separated and arranged in a perfect geometric pattern on the ground. A task that would have taken a team of engineers several hours to accomplish. Most bizarrely, the station's internal memory showed it had continued recording data for 3 days after its disassembly, including readings that defied known physics. The phenomena seemed to take particular interest in the scientific equipment. Devices would record impossible measurements before failing in inexplicable ways. A high-precision atomic clock began running backwards, while still maintaining perfect accuracy relative to itself. Weather balloons would disappear from radar, only to reappear days later, with their instruments showing they had recorded data from locations thousands of miles away. On April 2nd, the team experienced one of the most significant events of their investigation. Four of their most sophisticated weather monitoring towers, each weighing over 2 tons, vanished from their concrete foundations. Security cameras showed no evidence of movement. One frame they were there, the next they weren't. 3 hours later, the towers were discovered inside the station's main laboratory, precisely arranged in a tetrahedron formation, despite the room being far too small to contain them in any normal configuration. When Dr. Williams examined the towers, she discovered that their atomic structure had been temporarily altered, allowing them to pass through solid matter. Even more incredibly, the data in their memory banks appeared to be from weather patterns that wouldn't occur for another 3 weeks. By early summer, the team had documented hundreds of anomalies, but one pattern became clear. The phenomena seemed to be studying them as much as they were studying it. Equipment failures and strange events often occurred just as they were about to make a breakthrough, as if something was deliberately keeping them from understanding too much. The investigation took a darker turn in August when 2 researchers encountered what they described as a tear in reality near the original weather station building. Through sophisticated infrared equipment, they observed what appeared to be a tunnel of light opening in midair. Dr. Thompson described seeing a humanoid figure emerge from the tunnel, moving in ways that defied human physiology before disappearing into the darkness. The air around the event was charged with electromagnetic energy, so intense it permanently damaged their equipment. These encounters continued throughout the year, but the phenomena always stayed one step ahead of the scientific team. Cameras would fail at crucial moments, sensors would give contradictory readings, and the most dramatic events would occur just outside the range of their instruments. It became clear that whatever they were dealing with possessed intelligence and intent. By 1998, the frequency of events began to decrease, though their intensity remained consistent. Dr. Hawkins theorized that the phenomena hadn't actually diminished, but had rather learned to better avoid their detection methods. This theory was supported by occasional equipment readings, suggesting major events were occurring in ways their instruments couldn't properly measure or record. The IARP team remained at the station until 2004, documenting thousands of anomalous events, but never quite managing to gather conclusive evidence that would satisfy the broader scientific community. However, their research did succeed in quantifying several previously unknown physical phenomena, including what they termed localized temporal displacement fields and consciousness-responsive electromagnetic anomalies. The team's final report, while technically inconclusive, suggested they had encountered something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of reality. Dr. Hawkins proposed that the station existed at what he called a thin point between dimensions, where the normal rules of physics became more like guidelines than laws. Michael Anderson, who had remained with the project throughout its duration, eventually published a paper suggesting that the phenomena might be linked to what Inuit elders called shadow gates, places where, according to their legends, the boundary between worlds becomes permeable. His work drew interesting parallels between ancient folklore and modern physics, suggesting that indigenous peoples might have developed their own framework for understanding these anomalies. When the IARP team finally withdrew from the station in 2004, they left behind more questions than answers. Dr. Hawkins maintained ownership of the property until 2016, when he sold it to the Advanced Meteorological Research Institute, AMRI, with the stipulation that scientific investigation of the anomalies would continue. Intriguingly, shortly after the ownership change, the frequency of unusual events increased dramatically. New equipment began recording unprecedented atmospheric phenomena, and researchers reported seeing strange lights and unexplainable objects with increasing regularity. When asked about skeptics who dismissed the entire phenomenon, the current lead researcher at the station offered a simple response. The laws of physics are not suggestions. When we observe them being broken repeatedly, under controlled conditions, with multiple expert witnesses, we must accept that our understanding of reality is incomplete. The Talking to Weather Station remains a place of mystery and contradiction, where the bounds of scientific understanding are constantly challenged. While the Anderson family has long since found peace in their new life in Anchorage, the questions raised by their experiences continue to puzzle scientists and researchers. Their story serves as a reminder that in the vast wilderness of Alaska, there are still places where the conventional rules of reality seem to break down, where the boundary between the known and unknown becomes remarkably thin. The moorlands of Scotland are vast, desolate, and foreboding. As long as people have lived on these isles, there have been sightings of all manner of beasts and cryptids. Some, like the Highland wildcat, were later discovered to be real. Others, like the Kelpies and Selkies, walk a fine line between myth, fact, and mistaken identity. But there is one creature so elusive and so bizarre in its appearance that those who have witnessed it claim it can only come from the depths of hell. With stories dating back to well before Scotland's unification, how can we possibly explain the Moor Phantom? Nestled at the intersection between the Scottish Highlands and Lowlands lie the Great Peatlands, an ancient landscape covering over 500,000 acres. Despite Scotland's growing tourism industry, the central part of this primeval moorland is virtually devoid of civilization. Instead, it is dominated by a vast swampy heath covering thousands of acres, known rather ominously as the Torran Moors. Yet there is nothing tranquil about this massive expanse. In fact, it is teeming with life. To some, the area is a peaceful paradise, ideal for hiking, bird watching, and camping. Others find the moors almost primordial, an endless sea of heather and bogs untouched by time. The first people to settle here were the ancestors of the Pictish tribes, who arrived in the region over 8,000 years ago. In those days, massive aurochs and giant elk would have roamed the area alongside fearsome predators like dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. Yet despite the presence of these ferocious animals, the ancient Picts did not come to call it the land of the aurochs or the land of the wolf. No, they instead called it the land of the winged one. To this day, descendants of these tribes believe that these moors are home to spirits and creatures beyond human understanding. And though some base this on tribal mythology, the natives were far from the only ones to witness inexplicable entities here. In 1709, the Act of Union marked the beginning of Britain's formal expansion into the Scottish Highlands, driving many local clans into increasingly remote areas. Though rich in peat and wildlife, the Tauran Moors soon became known for something else. Its isolation, its dangers, and the eerie sense that something was watching from the mist. Only the desperate remained, poor crofters, outlaws, and Jacobite sympathizers, forming secretive insular communities. Amongst them, whispers of witchcraft and devilry grew, passed down through generations. And it was into this shadowy world that the legend of the Moor Phantom was born. But these tales do not belong solely to the past. Even today, reports of eerie sightings, unnatural sounds, and grotesque animal mutilations persist. Some dismiss the account of Lord Archibald Campbell, cousin to the Duke of Argyll, who claimed to have seen the creature whilst hunting in 1820. Then there is the report made by Park Ranger Lieutenant Gordon Tate in 1980, in which an entire farm's worth of sheep was discovered dead, each untouched except for a single precise bite to the back of the head, their brains mysteriously removed. Perhaps even more terrifying than the frequency of encounters is their consistency. Nearly every eyewitness describes the same nightmarish figure. A winged bipedal beast with cloven hooves, bat-like wings, and the elongated head of a goat. Its body is gaunt and twisted, trailing a forked tail. But its most haunting features are its glowing eyes, often the first thing people see gazing at them from the darkness. Some never see the creature at all, only hearing the sound that has chilled countless souls to the bone. A high-pitched, unearthly scream. Some believe the Moor Phantom is the winged one of Pictish legend. Others trace its origins to 1766, when a hermit named Finnegan Moore supposedly transformed himself through dark magic. According to local lore, Moore conducted a forbidden ritual during a solstice night, only to be consumed by the very powers he sought to control. The village found his cottage empty the next morning, with strange hoofprints leading into the depths of the moors, never to be seen again, at least not in human form. Whether prehistoric species or cursed hermit, the never-ending flow of sightings seems to support the idea that there is something sinister and deadly lurking in the Tauran Moors of Scotland. In cryptozoology, sightings are often judged by the credibility of the source. So when Lieutenant Gordon Tate reported finding mutilated sheep with bizarre injuries, both Moor Phantom believers and skeptics took notice. But Tate was not alone. Other rangers have had similar encounters, and some have seen far more than just remains. In 1993, Ranger Elias Donovan was patrolling the Culross River, a 30-mile waterway in the central peatlands. This river, historically used for transporting peat, had become infamous for strange livestock mutilations dating back to the mid-20th century. In 1966, a shepherd reported over 30 animals killed in a single night, including geese, ducks, cats, and dogs, all of them maimed in ways the shepherd could neither explain nor recognize. Weeks later, authorities responded to the brutal killing of a massive Scottish deerhound found with its throat ripped out. Despite thorough investigations, no one could explain the source of the mutilations, only that the creature responsible must have been extraordinarily strong. One evening in 1993, Donovan was driving her patrol vehicle down a remote trail beside the river. As a seasoned ranger, she had come to know the diverse wildlife in the area well. Red deer, badgers, and pine martens were a common sight, and the vibrant ecosystem was one of her favorite aspects of the job. As she drove along, her eyes were drawn to a large shape emerging from the mist and stepping onto the path. At first, she assumed it was a red stag, but that assumption was soon dispelled when the creature rose up on its hind legs. Donovan's heart raced as she brought the vehicle to a stop just a few meters from the beast. She froze wide-eyed as a wave of terror washed over her. What she saw was anything but natural. The creature was over 6 feet tall, covered in matted black fur resembling that of a wild goat, not the reddish-brown coat of a deer. As she examined the creature, she noticed that the horns on its head were long and spiral-shaped, completely unlike those of a stag. If anything, they resembled devil horns. As Donovan sat in her car, helpless and petrified, the creature turned its head and stared directly at her. Time seemed to slow as they locked eyes, and though Donovan couldn't make out its facial features, she felt the unmistakable presence of a killer before her. After several tense minutes, the creature slowly turned and disappeared into the mist. In later interviews, Donovan admitted that she could not explain what she'd seen. She was, however, adamant about one thing. Whatever it was clearly a predator. The encounter left her with an unsettling certainty that something far more sinister lurked in the Tauran moors. Something beyond human understanding, and certainly beyond explanation. In the summer of 1973, Fiona and her fiancé Hamish decided to meet some friends in Glenmore for a night of drinks and music on the moors. The group had a habit of finding a secluded clearing, parking their cars in a circle to form a makeshift picnic area, and using the car bonnets as tables and seating. Everyone tuned their radios to the same station to enjoy a mix of early glam rock, folk, and punk, whilst drinking and dancing under the glow of the headlights, far away from prying eyes. By 11 p.m., several couples had gathered, and the group was already well into the evening. Fiona hopped off the bonnet of their Morris Marina to grab Hamish another beer. He was chatting with a few friends by a nearby car, so she reached inside to unlock the boot. As she grabbed the drinks, the radio cut to a commercial, leaving an eerie silence. In that brief moment, Fiona heard rustling in the heather behind her. Growing up in the Scottish Highlands, she knew the moors had an ominous reputation. Not only were there treacherous bogs, but larger animals like wild boars and escaped Highland cattle were known to wander near campgrounds if they smelled food. This commotion was clearly caused by something large and powerful. Concerned, she closed the boot and told Hamish what she'd heard. Though initially skeptical, he agreed that something might be out there, especially with so much exposed food. They didn't want to risk an encounter with an aggressive animal, so Hamish ran to the cars, turning off the radios to get everyone's attention. Though the group grumbled, he insisted that they check out the disturbance just to be safe. As the music fell silent, they scanned the moors, but something immediately felt off. There were no crickets, no owls, no wind. The landscape was eerily still. Suddenly, someone shouted from the opposite side of the clearing, pointing towards the distant heather. It became clear that the creature, whatever it was circling them. Every time someone spotted a vague outline, another person would then see it somewhere else. The group began to feel the tension rising, and Fiona wondered why there were no growls or barks if it was wild dogs or foxes. Then it happened. Standing next to their Morris, Fiona saw a massive shape emerge into the clearing. The headlights illuminated the creature, a black, oddly shaped body about the size of a full-grown stag. But this was no deer. Its eyes glowed green like foxfire, and before anyone could react, it unfurled gigantic wings so large that one powerful flap sent the beast soaring into the sky, causing plates of food and beer cans to fly off car bonnets. The creature was gone in an instant, and the group, terrified, scrambled into their vehicles and sped off to a well-lit area. Too intoxicated to drive home, they spent the night in a car park, waiting for the morning light. The next day, when they had sobered up, each of them gave the same account: black wings, glowing eyes, and a powerful rush of air as the creature took flight. Mass sightings in cryptozoology are rare. Most people have a friend of a friend who claims to have seen Nessie or to have been abducted by aliens. But a dozen people all reporting the same creature with consistent details is something far more compelling. And this is the case with many more phantom sightings, even dating back to the 17th and 18th centuries. Entire hunting parties have reported encounters with the creature. Though this account is the largest of such mass sightings, it is not the most terrifying. In the summer of 2003, a group of friends, all in their 20s, embarked on a camping trip to the Torren Moors. Oliver and his closest friends, Duncan, Logan, and Alastair, had just finished their university degrees and were seeking one final adventure before going their separate ways. Though none of them were experienced outdoorsmen, they decided the Torren Moors would be perfect, remote enough to feel wild, but not so far from civilization that they'd be stranded if anything went wrong. Duncan's brother dropped them off at the edge of the moor, where they planned to spend 4 days and 3 nights hiking. For safety, each carried a walking staff, while Logan and Alastair also brought flare guns. With their backpacks packed and a rough plan in place, the group ventured into the moors. After hours of walking, they found a clearing which was 50 feet across and set up camp. With daylight still remaining, they headed into the moors to take photographs. But despite being far from any village, they noticed a disturbing amount of litter. Plastic bottles, beer cans, and bags seemed to be scattered all around. Whilst investigating the area, Duncan spotted a plastic bag caught high up in the branches of a gnarled pine. When he climbed up to look inside, he found that it contained a mutilated fox. Its head was crushed, and its chest was torn open, exposing its ribs. The group debated how the animal might have suffered such a fate, speculating that a predatory bird, possibly a golden eagle, had killed it and stored it there. Though unsettling, this discovery would turn out to be far from unique. After their photography session, as they made their way back to the campsite, they discovered a dead badger, its chest also ripped open. It was then that the boys realized they had returned to the same tree where they had found the fox. But when they looked up into the branches, the bag was gone. Back at the camp, they had just settled down to eat dinner and talk amongst themselves, when the tranquility of the evening was suddenly shattered by a blood-curdling scream which echoed across the moors. It was high-pitched and agonizing, seeming to split the night air. Despite each of the lads feeling deeply unsettled by this, none of them could admit it to each other, so they continued their meal in silence. As the evening progressed, the group tried to shake off the lingering feeling of unease. They were sitting around the campfire talking when Alistair stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked on something just beyond the firelight. Oliver followed his gaze and saw two glowing green eyes staring back at them from the darkness. Then there was a deep snort, followed by a guttural growl. Oliver noticed that these eyes were at the same level as his, despite the fact he was 6 feet 4 inches tall. In a panic, they grabbed their flares and fired them into the darkness, hoping to drive off whatever was out there. After several tense seconds, the Moors fell ominously silent. As midnight rolled around, they took turns keeping watch while the others tried to sleep. At some point in the early hours, Duncan heard something moving out in the heather, well beyond the range of the firelight. Realizing they weren't safe, the others decided to stay awake and resolved to leave at the break of dawn. In the morning, they found a series of large hoof prints around the edge of their camp, far too large to have been made by a deer. Still unnerved, but relieved to see daylight, the group set off towards the nearest road, believing they would make it back by early afternoon. But as the day wore on, they noticed something strange. The moors seemed different. Landmarks they had noticed on the way in were gone or altered, and slowly but surely, the lads realized they were lost. They hadn't brought any survival gear aside from a few compasses, and knowing that the road was east, they began to head in that direction. As they hiked, the group discovered more animal carcasses. First, a sheep, freshly killed. Its stomach was torn open, and its eyes, legs, and much of its entrails were missing. As they progressed, they found more mutilated animals, rabbits, grouse, and small birds, all in a similar state. At first, they convinced themselves it was the work of foxes, but their assumptions were soon shattered when they found a grouping of these animals, all mutilated in the same way. As the sun began to set once more, the unease became unbearable, as they still hadn't found the road. Several hours later, as the moors grew pitch dark around them, panic began to set in. They had stopped to take a breather when another high-pitched screech suddenly ripped through the night air. Then they heard another strange commotion overhead. They quickly realized it was the sound of beating wings, only they were deep, loud, and slow, as if produced by something huge. As the noise grew closer, the terrified group switched off their torches and dove for cover in the nearby heather. They spent the next several minutes hiding, listening, and waiting, but the moors around them were deathly quiet. After a time, they decided it was safe to continue and regrouped in the center of the clearing, where they had been resting. In the perfect darkness, they had noticed a string of lights a few hundred meters away in the distance. It was a road, and they all began to relax as they realized they were getting closer to civilization, and therefore safety. But as Logan once again switched on his torch and swung it to his left, the beam picked out something in the mist nearby. It was a gaunt creature coated in black fur, standing about 6 to 7 feet tall, with horns protruding from its head. Its eyes suddenly glowed green, as if it had only just opened them. Then it took up a confrontational stance, unfurled its wings, and screamed in their direction, revealing a set of sharp yellow teeth. The group scattered in different directions, driven by pure panic. Oliver ran towards what they had determined was the road, the dim light of the street lamps just barely visible through the mist. The others followed close behind, and as they reached the road, they once again heard the unmistakable sound of huge beating wings. Then a pair of bright lights appeared from around a bend. It was a police car, which sped past them and then skidded to a stop just as it collided with something on the tarmac. As the two police officers exited their vehicle, whatever they had hit simply got up and ran off into the moors on all fours. The officers then turned their attention to the group of young men and spoke to them for nearly 30 minutes, telling them how lucky they were to have escaped a rabid stag of that size. When Oliver tried to explain what they had really seen, one of the officers shot him a stern look, signaling for him to stay quiet. The implication was clear. Telling anyone about the creature was not advisable. In the end, the group left the moors with a terrifying story they could never fully share, and none of them would ever return to the Tauren moors again. The Moor Phantom has long straddled the line between folklore and reality. To skeptics, the legend is nothing more than a mix of rural superstition and misidentified wildlife. Tales of the creature, whether from Pictish traditions or the infamous story of Finnegan Moore's transformation, are seen as cautionary myths designed to keep children from wandering into the dangerous Tauren moors. However, the Moor story is rooted in some historical truth. Records confirm that a hermit by that name did live in the area, and some suggest the legend arose from social disdain, branding him as an outcast. Combined with the peatland's eerie reputation, the Moor Phantom became something of a convenient deterrent. Yet folklore alone doesn't explain the sheer volume of sightings. Hundreds claim to have seen a tall, winged beast with glowing eyes and a terrifying screech. Biologists often point to the European crane as a possible explanation. These birds, with their large wingspans and eerie cries, could certainly startle an unsuspecting traveler. But their height of just 4 to 5 feet and their lack of a goat-like head leave many unconvinced. Another theory involves the Scottish wildcat, a species native to the Highlands, with an unsettling, almost prehistoric appearance. Some believe that during periods of extreme scarcity, these animals may have adapted unusual hunting patterns, explaining the animal mutilations. However, no physical evidence supports this idea, and the largest known specimen weighs less than 15 pounds, far smaller than eyewitness descriptions. Some cryptozoologists argue that the Moor Phantom is an undiscovered species, an anomaly unrecognized by science. But such a creature would defy all known biology. A flying animal with a goat-like head doesn't align with any species in the fossil record. For instance, if the creature does indeed have such features, it would almost certainly be a mammal. But the only mammals capable of true flight are bats. All other species, whether current or prehistoric, have only ever been able to glide. For more paranormally minded theorists, the Tauren moors themselves hold the key. Some Pictish artifacts suggest the region was a spiritual place where the veil between worlds thinned. Could the Moor Phantom be an interdimensional entity, appearing and vanishing through unseen portals? This idea isn't unique. Similar theories have been proposed for the Loch Ness Monster and other elusive cryptids, which often seem to defy conventional understanding. Regardless of the explanations, the Moor Phantom remains one of Scotland's most enduring mysteries. For some, it's simply a tall tale, a relic of old fears. For others, it's something far stranger, perhaps an undiscovered species, or even a visitor from another realm. Regardless, the legend endures, and the sightings continue. Whatever lurks in the moorlands of Scotland, one thing is certain: those who have encountered it never forget. And if you ever find yourself alone in the Torren moors after the sun has sunk below the horizon, listen closely, because if the stories are true, the phantom still lingers, watching and waiting in the shadows. Victor Kowalski, a former park ranger turned author, believes something strange is happening in and around European national parks. After documenting thousands of baffling deaths and disappearances, we join him in questioning whether something in these forests is stalking and hunting human beings. The national parks of Europe are some of the most breathtaking and magnificent places on Earth. From the rugged peaks of the Alps to the ancient forests of the Carpathians, from the crystal-clear lakes of Bavaria to the endless moorlands of Scotland, each offers something truly unique. Whether snow-capped mountain ranges, peaceful valleys, vast grasslands stretching as far as the eye can see, or forests that seem to have no end, these protected wildernesses attract millions of visitors from around the world each year. Their landscapes are genuinely awe-inspiring, and it's no wonder so many tourists flock to these areas of exceptional natural beauty season after season. It should come as no surprise that many people lose their way while hiking or exploring these regions. Although most are located by dedicated search and rescue teams within 48 hours, some vanish, often in mysterious and inexplicable circumstances, never to be seen again. As magnificent and unforgettable as these places may be, amidst all their splendor lies a dark and disturbing truth that authorities seem reluctant to address. Often described in Europe as the continent's silent disaster, people have been disappearing from national parks by the thousands over recent centuries. The exact number remains unknown because, astonishingly, European park authorities have only recently begun compiling databases on these missing persons. This fact was discovered by Victor Kowalski, a former park ranger turned author investigating the high strangeness surrounding these vanishings. Kowalski has cataloged over 1,000 bizarre disappearances in a series of books titled Vanished Without Trace. And although his investigations are thorough, the picture he paints is far from complete. He fears there could be many more cases unknown to the public that probably never will be revealed. Kowalski reportedly began working on this project shortly after visiting the Tatra National Park, where he was approached by a senior ranger who told him about being part of search and rescue efforts for several recent unexplained disappearances, and that he believed something much larger was happening. Being an accomplished outdoorsman himself, Kowalski was intrigued by the notion of experienced hikers and hunters vanishing in terrain they knew well. He promised to look into it, little knowing he had embarked on an almost insurmountable task involving years of research and investigation, culminating in an extensive body of work that would bring these mysteries truly into the spotlight. He began by filtering out certain factors to focus solely on incidents that defied conventional explanation, logic, or behavior. He excluded cases that explicitly involved foul play, mental illness, and therefore the possibility of suicide, clear signs of animal attack, the possibility of missing persons drowning or being swept away, and initially, cases in and around urban areas. Over time, he noticed these disappearances formed clusters, specifically around European national parks and mountain ranges. Kowalski concludes something strange is happening, something as indefinable as it is elusive, as unsettling as it is mysterious. He believes an unknown entity might be behind these disappearances, one that is intelligent and patient, predatory and unseen. What follows are select examples of the strangest vanishings ever recorded in European national parks. One must remember when considering these cases that conventional explanations have either been completely ruled out or remain extremely unlikely. Perhaps the most famous example of someone vanishing without a trace in a national park is that of Michael Bergman, a 7-year-old boy who had set out with his father, grandfather, and 8-year-old sister on June 21st, 2009, to hike up to an area known as Eagle's View in the Bavarian Alps. Around 2 in the afternoon, Michael, his sister, and a couple of other children they had befriended decided to play hide-and-seek. As the game ended, all the children emerged from their hiding places except Michael. He was nowhere to be found. The last time anyone saw him, he was running toward a bush at the edge of the meadow, behind which lay dense woodland. His father, Heinrich Bergman, became increasingly concerned and proceeded to run 2 kilometers up the Alpine Trail, hoping to find his son, but to no avail. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 1,200 searchers covered an area of 40 square kilometers with the aid of helicopters and tracking dogs, searching desperately for the missing child. He was never seen again. Even a specialized mountain rescue team joined the search effort, although they worked independently and refused to engage with anyone outside their group, behavior many found strange. On the day Michael disappeared, the Weber family, hiking toward Falcon Creek, about 3 kilometers from Eagle's View as the crow flies, heard a terrible scream at around 3:30 in the afternoon, approximately 90 minutes after Michael was last seen. When they looked in the direction the scream had come from, they saw what they described as a bear mixed with a man, carrying a small child over its shoulder, scurrying off into the dense forest. The police dismissed this account, saying the timeframes were too narrow, and no one could have hiked that distance over rough terrain so quickly. However, a ranger involved in the search, named Klaus Mayer, proved this assertion false when he hiked the same journey in just over an hour. Alina Schmidt was a university student from Munich, who, in September 2014, visited the Black Forest while on a field trip. She was with 38 classmates, hiking from a parking area to a spot called Raven's Peak. As the afternoon progressed, the students broke into smaller groups, each determined by their respective walking speeds. Alina was about 20 meters ahead of her group when she suddenly stopped in the middle of the path. Friends later reported that she appeared to be looking off to the side, almost as if she had seen something interesting in the undergrowth. She then stepped off the trail in the direction she was looking and was never seen again. Police initially disbelieved her friends about the point where she had apparently left the path, as it was a steep, almost sheer drop, followed by hundreds of meters of dense woodland that would have been nearly impossible to navigate. Despite massive search efforts, Alina Schmidt was never found. In July 2018, a man named Nicholas Hagen was climbing the Matterhorn with 2 other alpinists. They were all tethered together on the same rope, spaced about 20 to 30 meters apart. The lead climber, Marcus Weber, stopped at 4,200 meters and waited for his two companions, hoping they could summit the mountain together. He was joined shortly afterward by the second climber, Julian Moser, and they both waited for Nicholas, who never arrived. After reeling in the rope, they discovered he was not attached to the other end, even though they had caught glimpses of him behind them only moments before. Bad weather had been rolling in, and they assumed he had detached to take a rest. Something highly irresponsible, but not unheard of. Heading back down the mountainside, they saw no sign of him whatsoever, and discovered that his tracks seemed to just stop in the middle of nowhere. Helicopters scoured the slopes, but found nothing. Search and rescue discovered his backpack, climbing harness, and ice axe at 4,050 meters, but Nicholas himself was never located. Agneta Larsson was a 68-year-old wildfire spotter working for the Swedish Forest Service. On the night of August 15, 2012, she was stationed at the very remote Storsjön lookout tower, situated 30 kilometers northwest of Östersund. She had the vital job of watching for any sign of forest fires during the day and sleeping at the tower during the night. On the morning of August 16th, she failed to perform a routine radio check-in with her supervisor, a task required at least 3 times daily. Another fire spotter was sent to the tower to check on her, but found that she was gone. All that was missing from the cabin was her blanket. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The stove had been lit, and a pot of water had been placed on it, but the contents had long since boiled away. Her truck was still outside, and authorities found no tracks leading in or out of the area other than those left by her own vehicle. She was of sound mind and had a loving family. It seems unlikely she would have just left in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. Agneta was never seen again, and her disappearance caused the National Forestry Service to change how lookout towers operate throughout the region. Thomas Fischer was a 20-year-old amateur photographer from Berlin. In December of 2008, he backpacked to the Austrian Alps on an extended vacation, photographing scenery along the way. In January the following year, he was staying with a friend in Innsbruck. He planned a short excursion to Hohe Tauern National Park to take pictures of the beautiful winter landscapes before returning to his friend's house 2 days later. He never did. Massive search and rescue efforts were launched, but nothing was found, no tracks, no scents, no eyewitnesses, nothing. A year later, a couple of hikers located a backpack 10 kilometers from the trailhead, and after being examined by authorities, it was determined to belong to Thomas. Park rangers got a search party to the same area within hours, and shortly afterward, they found Fischer's remains, or what was left of them. The scene was strange, to say the least. All they found of him was his jeans, unbuttoned, sitting on a log in the middle of nowhere, frozen in position as if an invisible man was sitting inside them. His socks were sticking out of the legs at the bottom as you would expect, and inside them they found small foot bones. 10 feet away, they found the top of his skull. His shirt, coat, boots, and all his other belongings were nowhere to be seen, and they never found the rest of his body. Most perplexing was how he even got to this location. On the day he vanished, there had been 2 meters of fresh snow on the ground, making it impossible to travel there at that time, even with a snowmobile. A similar case occurred in Finland's Lapland region in 2010. 47-year-old Fredrik Lindqvist was, according to everyone who knew him, the greatest outdoorsman you've never heard of. He was intelligent, strong, incredibly fit, and had been hiking and hunting the wilds of northern Europe since his early teens. There was no doubting his experience. In September of 2010, he chartered a pilot to fly him into a remote region 150 kilometers north of Rovaniemi, intending to hunt elk alone. He was well equipped, taking along 3 crates of supplies that carried his food, camping equipment, and hunting gear. The pilot dropped him off and arranged to return 3 weeks later to pick him up. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. When the pilot returned, he found Fredrik's camp set up and well stocked, but could see no sign of the man himself. The Finnish border guard mounted an extended search of the area, and eventually found a few of his teeth and bone fragments on the ground, about 20 meters from his camp. Not far from these remains, they found his waterproof bag on the ground, indented as if he had been sitting on it, and his hunting bow propped against a tree. Examination of bear and wolf scat in the area ruled out the possibility that he had been eaten by a large animal, and friends were quick to dismiss this anyway, saying he was far too experienced an outdoorsman to have been surprised by a bear or some other predator. Besides, there was no disturbed ground or snapped branches indicating any signs of struggle. If he had indeed been taken unawares by a bear or wolf, why had the supplies at his camp not been raided? Another strange case 2 years earlier, in 2008, centered around a 22-year-old surveyor from Kiev. Andriy Petrenko was working as part of a 4-man crew near dense woodland in the Carpathian Mountains. At the end of the day, the team headed back to their vehicle, walking along Mountain Ridge Road, a straight highway bordered by woodland on both sides. Each crew member was walking roughly 15 meters apart, and Andriy was last in line. Within a few seconds, he had vanished. His colleagues went back to the point where he was last seen and found several coins on the ground. They also discovered one of his work boots snagged on the barbed wire fence lining the road, as well as fibers from his work trousers. Despite a wide-ranging search involving hundreds of people, Andriy was never found. Several months later, his other boot was located by a property owner near a swamp 800 meters from where he vanished. The fact that they found the contents of his pockets on the road suggests that he had been turned upside down. Richard Wagner was a 23-year-old man from Munich. On the night of June 16, 2015, he attended a party with his cousin, but left around 12:30 in the morning because he was feeling tired. He hadn't drunk much, but decided to walk home as he preferred not to risk driving while under the influence. At approximately 12:51 in the morning, he called a friend and was heard to say, "I'm in a field," before the call suddenly cut off. The friend called him back, but heard only heavy breathing and what sounded like wind before the call cut off again. Richard then tried to call his friend back 2 more times, the last attempt being at 12:57 in the morning, but nothing else was heard from him that night. The next day, he failed to show up for a family gathering, which was completely out of character for the young man. And when it was discovered that no one else had seen him after the party, his concerned parents reported him missing. A huge search took place involving over 1,000 volunteers and helicopters equipped with infrared cameras. Lakes and ponds in the area were dragged and diving teams deployed, but nothing was found. It was as if Richard had simply vanished from the face of the earth. 3 weeks later, on July 7th, a couple walking along the shore of Lake Starnberg saw something out in the water. It looked like a man standing upright, his head and shoulders bobbing on the surface of the lake. It turned out to be the body of Richard Wagner. The location where he was found shocked everyone, as the lake had been searched multiple times during the intervening weeks, and it was in completely the opposite direction from where he had been heading. The cause of death was listed as drowning while under the influence of alcohol, but no water was found in his lungs, and his blood alcohol level was relatively low. So who or what is responsible for these killings and disappearances? Kowalski is reluctant to single out any particular culprit or cause, but he has indirectly hinted at several possibilities, and the tone of his books strongly suggests something out of the ordinary. Skeptics have largely disparaged Kowalski's work, arguing that he often deliberately omits certain details that don't fit his narrative, and that there are rational explanations for every single one of these cases. Their reasoning includes animal attacks, a serial killer, or possibly several, people becoming disoriented and injured, people having a desire to intentionally disappear or commit suicide, drug dealers or drug manufacturers conducting business in the wilderness and killing those who stumble upon their operations, or quick or sudden death due to illness or exposure. Animal attacks will always leave telltale signs such as blood, pieces of flesh, torn clothing, tracks, scents, and signs of a struggle having taken place, such as snapped branches or disturbed ground. None of the cases Kowalski presents show any evidence of this, and therefore he rules this out as a possibility. The same can be said for serial killers. It is highly unlikely they would fail to leave any trace of having been there. Becoming lost and disoriented is indeed plausible, but many people who disappear are highly familiar with their surroundings and have either hiked or hunted those locations countless times before. And even if they do get lost, why do organized search parties, tracking dogs, and helicopters with forward-looking infrared still fail to find them? In all these cases, the individuals were of sound mind as far as any of their friends or colleagues knew, making suicides unlikely, although not implausible. Disappearing intentionally to start a new life, on the other hand, could be a possibility, but doing so would be an immense undertaking, would take months of planning, and cost a great deal of money. Something difficult to hide from friends or loved ones. In either of these cases, this does not explain why search and rescue parties are unable to locate any trace of them whatsoever. Drug manufacturers operating in remote regions is not unheard of. However, the national parks of Europe seem like unlikely places for such practices, given the number of annual visitors. Drug dealers would know that killing someone would only invite more unwanted attention to the region in the form of park rangers, search and rescue parties, and police officers. Finally, succumbing to some underlying illness or injury sustained, while hiking is probably the most likely cause of these disappearances. Kowalski even notes that many of these individuals had some form of disability or condition, or reported feeling unwell before they vanished. However, it is very odd how search and rescue attempts still failed to locate their bodies. One would think that an individual who was feeling ill would not stray too far off established trails, if at all. Depending on the nature of an injury, accident victims would not be too difficult to locate either, especially with the help of tracking dogs and search helicopters equipped with infrared. So when all these explanations have been exhausted, what are we left with? Kowalski is mystified by the apparent commonalities between each case, such as the fact that in instances where dead bodies are found, they rarely find the victim's shoes or boots, or they are in a state of undress, and a satisfactory cause of death is rarely established. Of course, some people have suggested that these disappearances are the result of something paranormal or supernatural. Theories have ranged from woodland spirits to large cryptids, such as the European equivalent of Bigfoot or the Yeti alien abductions, people slipping through interdimensional portals, and even certain plant life activating some form of defense to human presence. And as unbelievable as these suggestions may sound, there have in fact been instances where people experienced such things while in national parks and lived to tell the tale. There is a bizarre phenomenon that countless people have reported while hiking, known simply as the silence. Typically, an individual will be walking through woodland when everything will suddenly go quiet. All wildlife falls silent. The breeze rustling through the leaves dies down, and the air around them seems to get heavier. By all accounts, it is an incredibly unnerving experience, as people often report feeling as if they're being watched or stalked by something. This same thing happened to Ingrid Hoffman, wife of renowned physicist Thomas Hoffman, while she was hiking in the Black Forest in 2016. It was around 6 in the evening, and she was on a marked trail approximately 5 kilometers from the nearest road. She reported that everything suddenly went quiet, and within minutes, she noticed an odd distortion moving through the branches about 6 meters from her position. She described it as a humanoid figure that appeared to be cloaked. She managed to take one picture before it moved off, and the sounds of wildlife returned. The image shows what looks like the edge of a face with hair sticking out from behind it, backlit by the sun. A compelling piece of footage uploaded in 2019 by YouTuber Jakob Schneider appears to show what looks like a tall, humanoid creature peering out from behind a tree, perfectly camouflaged by its surroundings. Although this could be nothing more than a case of pareidolia, the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. It is interesting nonetheless. Whatever is responsible for these disappearances, whether it is paranormal, supernatural, or something altogether more ordinary, the prospect of losing your way in such vast and often inhospitable terrain is no less frightening. Truly, these places are wonderful examples of just how beautiful our world can be. And this account should not deter you from visiting them if you are lucky enough to have the opportunity. But we would urge you to be vigilant, make all the necessary preparations, take all the necessary precautions, and finally, expect the unexpected. For more than a century, a steady stream of adventurers and thrill seekers have lost their lives under mysterious circumstances, while searching for a legendary temple hidden away somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. The headless bodies of those eventually found have have made it clear that something ancient and sinister lurks in these peaks. Even for Romania, July was proving to be unusually harsh. The summer of 1958 had brought scorching temperatures that hadn't dropped below 86 degrees Fahrenheit for the past 2 weeks. Marcus Popescu, a local police detective, trudged along the mountain path, silently praying for even a hint of rain. The stark landscape offered no shelter, and the merciless sun beat down from directly overhead. The detective paused again to take another sip from his water bottle. A gentle shake confirmed it was nearly empty, but thankfully he carried a spare. His partner, Adrian Ionescu, had insisted Popescu take his along too. The decision for Ionescu to remain at their vehicle, with the hikers who had called for police assistance, wasn't a difficult one. As soon as the officers had arrived, the haunted expressions on the faces of the 2 university students made it clear they would be little help in showing the way. Popescu had seen their kind 100 times before naive academics, their heads filled with tales of ancient treasures and mythical Dacian guardians. Rather than endure another hour of their nervous stammering, he had made them repeat the directions until he was satisfied they weren't lying, then set off up the mountain's eastern slopes. Approximately 30 minutes later, Popescu found what he was looking for. A short distance from the main trail, hidden behind a small rock formation, lay the dusty remains of a campsite. The detective pulled out his notebook and pen from his jacket pocket and slowly circled the perimeter, noting down relevant details. A camera cleaning kit lay scattered to one side, its contents forming a wide arc of debris. While the absence of any memory cards was somewhat reassuring, the missing camera itself concerned him. Despite the wind-blown debris that had clearly settled over the past few days, signs of a violent struggle were evident: deep scuff marks and gouges in the earth, the remains of a meal scattered chaotically across the ground. Popescu recognized the radiation detector for what it was, but that wasn't the item that held his attention. Several feet from the camp, caught on a thorny bush, was a modern sleeping bag. The detective approached cautiously, wincing at the dark bloodstains that had soaked its interior. After collecting several pieces of torn correspondence, all with identifying information deliberately removed, he used his radio to call Ionescu back to town for reinforcements. He settled onto a nearby boulder, sighing wearily before lighting a cigarette. The remains of the campsite's owner would turn up eventually. They always did. If they were lucky, he thought grimly, this time the head might still be attached. The cursed peaks dominate the skyline of northern Romania, named for their highest point, Mount Zalmoxis, a 3,000-foot monolith that towers over the surrounding landscape. Rarely has a geographical feature been more aptly named, as even before medieval settlements appeared in the region, the indigenous Dacian tribes regarded the location with an uncomfortable mixture of fear and reverence. The Dacians swore that the mountain was home to Zalmoxis, their vengeful god of the underworld, who resided deep within its caves and tunnels. Only through regular worship and sacrifice could he be persuaded not to rise and lay waste to the lands around his domain. They also believed that hidden somewhere within the mountain range was a bottomless portal leading straight to the realm of the dead. But it was whispered tales of an ancient temple filled with sacred gold that caught the attention of Roman legions arriving in the area during the 2nd century. Their forays into the foothills brought them into direct conflict with the Dacians, who warned that only misery and death awaited those who ventured into the domain of Zalmoxis. Rich veins of gold were indeed discovered, but extracting this wealth came at a terrible price. Almost immediately, decapitated and mutilated bodies of soldiers sent to mine the precious metal were recovered. Their iron armor and short swords proved little match for whatever mysterious force guarded the treasure. As their numbers dwindled, the Romans withdrew. But the lure of the gold would prove impossible to resist for many others. Over the centuries, countless adventurers returned to the cursed peaks in search of the hidden fortune, meeting varied levels of success. It wasn't until the 1840s that the first documented discovery was made. Victor Kovács, a Hungarian explorer, emerged from the mountains carrying ancient gold artifacts of clearly Dacian origin. He refused to reveal their source, regularly venturing alone into the peaks and returning with more priceless relics. Records show he sold over $200,000 worth of artifacts before his death in 1891 from a mysterious wasting disease. Following Kovács's death, numerous attempts were made to locate what became known as the Lost Temple of Dacia. As those who set out into the mountains failed to return, the story evolved from local legend into national obsession. The first recorded death came in 1896. An eccentric historian named Radu Antonscu relocated from Bucharest to the mountains and built a small cabin from which to conduct his research. Antonscu was peculiar, refusing to cut his hair or beard, often wandering the valleys in a state of undress, while muttering about ancient spirits. His behavior was so strange that even local shepherds avoided him. When his mangled body was found 4 miles from his cabin, the head had been carefully placed on a rock several meters away, positioned to gaze down at his remains. Historian Nicolae Dragomir announced his intention to locate the temple in June of 1931. After equipping himself with extensive supplies, he disappeared into the wilderness. The following December, his skull was located by a search party hired by his family. The cause of death seemed obvious. 2 large-caliber bullet holes pierced the center of the forehead. 4 weeks later, his decapitated corpse was found several miles away, identified by metal pins in one leg from a previous injury. The coroner ruled it suicide, claiming Dragomir had shot himself when unable to walk further. This proved unconvincing to his family, who pointed out that he couldn't have shot himself in the head twice, and no gun was ever recovered. Equally disturbing was the death of photographer Gabriel Stainscu in July of 1947. He arranged helicopter transport into the mountains, establishing a base camp with 2 weeks of supplies in Negru Valley before setting out on foot to search for the temple. When the pilot returned 2 weeks later to find all supplies untouched and no sign of Stainscu, he immediately alerted authorities. A search party was organized with tracking dogs, but it wasn't until the following February that hikers found Stainscu's remains wrapped in a blanket and suspended from a cliff face by a rope tied tightly around the bundle. Once again, the head was missing and several ribs were broken. His identification, clothing, and money were all neatly piled nearby, with a rock placed on top to prevent them from blowing away. the mysterious slayings have continued, with the most recent being that of a 35-year-old American researcher in December of 2009. Thomas Morrison was obsessed with finding the lost temple and had made multiple trips to the Cursed Peaks before his disappearance. A police search found his rental car abandoned on a remote track, with his phone and wallet still inside. Morrison's shattered body was recovered 3 years later, wedged in a narrow crevasse halfway down a sheer rock face inaccessible from above. There was no indication of how he had come to rest there. Strange phenomena have also been reported by visitors to the region, including phantom orbs of light dancing in the night sky and sightings of a tall, skeletal figure moving across the valleys after dark, searching the ground with a flickering lantern. Bedtime Stories was first alerted to the myths surrounding the Cursed Peaks by subscriber Mercia Popov. He contacted us to share a disturbing experience from his 2015 hiking trip. He and several friends had discovered the wreckage of a small aircraft that had crashed there in December 2011, killing all 4 occupants. The group stopped to rest at the crash site, and Mercia took several photos with his phone. A week after returning home, while showing the pictures to his mother, she gasped and pointed to something standing behind the group. When Mercia zoomed in, he was bewildered to see what appeared to be a figure dressed entirely in white, staring directly at the camera from about 50 feet behind them. The figure hadn't been there that day, and more importantly, couldn't have been. They were on a one-way trail, and anyone approaching would have had to pass directly by the group. Yet no one saw anything. Upon closer inspection, the figure's skin appeared badly burned. Over 100 unsolved murders and unexplained deaths have been documented within the boundaries of the Cursed Peaks during the last century, the overwhelming majority being people searching for the lost temple of Dacia. So what force so fiercely guards this location against intruders? Dacian writings reference beings known as the Striga, underground dwellers, occasionally glimpsed on mountain ridges, watching travelers entering their territory. Few warriors who encountered these creatures lived to tell the tale. It's easy to dismiss such stories as fantasy, except for the similarities they bear to another mysterious mountain region, Canada's Nahanni National Park, known locally as Headless Valley. Like the Cursed Peaks, it was home to indigenous people until rumors of gold attracted prospectors and treasure hunters. Similar patterns of decapitated bodies, unexplained deaths, and strange phenomena have been reported there for over a century. The Dene people blame these killings on supernatural warriors who take the heads of their enemies as trophies. The Dacian belief that the Cursed Peaks hide a portal to the underworld isn't unique. Tales of these hellmouths appear in cultures worldwide. One famous example lies 50 kilometers north of Prague Hauska Castle, built in the 13th century, allegedly to seal a chasm from which winged demons emerged. While easy to dismiss as medieval superstition, the castle's unusual construction raises questions. Built in an isolated area away from roads, with all defenses facing inward and no facilities for a permanent garrison. Whatever truth may lie in these legends, the fact that some victims were killed with modern firearms suggests a more rational explanation. In 1945, researcher Dmitry Vladsky claimed to have survived an encounter with a mysterious sniper who stalked him for several days before he escaped. Vladescu theorized this shooter might have been responsible for Nikolai Dragomir's death 15 years earlier. Given the time span over which the murders have occurred, it seems impossible that one killer could be responsible. This suggests the possibility of a secret organization or cult that continues to protect the temple's treasures, willing to go to extreme lengths to prevent others from finding them. As with any mystery we examine, the truth likely lies somewhere between fantastic theories and mundane explanations. Many deaths can probably be attributed to murder-suicide, accidents, or natural causes. The apparent decapitations might often result from bodies being exposed to harsh weather and wildlife. But animal activity and exposure cannot fully explain the more bizarre fatalities. The high number of unexplained cases in both the Cursed Peaks and Nahanni Valley suggests hostile forces do indeed dwell within these mountain ranges. Perhaps one day we'll discover what truly guards the lost temple of Dacia. Until then, our thoughts are with all those who have perished in its pursuit and the families they left behind. May they rest in peace. The Bering Strait, stretching between Alaska and the Russian Far East, stands as one of the world's most challenging and vital maritime passages. Each day, nearly 200 ships brave these treacherous waters, carrying approximately 1/5 of the Pacific trade goods. The strait's significance as a crucial maritime artery is matched only by its notorious reputation. The waters narrow to just 2 miles wide at the Deomed Islands, making navigation particularly hazardous for larger vessels. Yet the tight passage is perhaps the least of mariners' concerns. Over the past 100 years, these waters have claimed more than 40 ships, roughly one every 2 to 3 years. Among these maritime casualties, the MS Northern Light would meet such a bizarre and terrifying end that it would haunt sailors for generations to come. In December 1947, vessels navigating the Bering Strait received an unusual distress call from an unidentified source. The message, transmitted in Morse code, came in 2 parts that failed to specify the ship's identity or location, but painted a chilling picture of the situation aboard. The first transmission read, "All officers, including captain, found dead in navigation room and bridge. Possibly entire crew dead." Minutes later, a final haunting message followed, "I am dying." Then only silence remained. The authorities immediately launched a desperate search operation. All ships in the vicinity were placed on high alert, instructed to watch for anything unusual. Initially, the search yielded nothing. However, with the combined efforts of American and Canadian monitoring stations, they managed to triangulate the source of the signal. The location surprised everyone. The vessel had somehow drifted far from established shipping lanes, deep into the northern Pacific waters. The Arctic Guardian, an American rescue vessel, happened to be the nearest ship to the distress signal's origin. Captain James Holder, a veteran of these waters, immediately set course for the coordinates. After several hours of navigation through the bitter cold, they spotted a ship silhouetted against the steel-gray horizon, the MS Northern Light. The vessel appeared completely lifeless, drifting aimlessly through the frozen seas. Multiple attempts to establish radio contact went unanswered. As the Arctic Guardian drew alongside, an eerie silence enveloped both ships. The rescue crew, led by First Officer Michael O'Brien, prepared to board the stricken vessel, fighting back their growing sense of dread. Their worst fears materialized as soon as they stepped aboard. The deck was littered with frozen corpses of the crew members, each face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Their eyes were wide with fear, mouths agape in silent screams, and their limbs twisted as if they had died fighting off an invisible attacker. Even the ship's German shepherd lay dead, its teeth bared in a final snarl. The search party found the captain's body on the bridge, while other officers were discovered in the chart room. The engineering crew remained at their stations below deck, and the radio operator, David Peterson, was found slumped over his equipment, presumably after sending that final, chilling message. Every single body bore the same expression of horrific fear, their limbs contorted unnaturally. The cause of death remained a mystery. The ship showed no signs of damage, and despite the crew's terrified expressions, their bodies appeared unharmed. However, two bizarre details caught the rescue team's attention. First, the bodies were decomposing at an unnaturally rapid rate. Second, despite the bitter Arctic temperatures hovering around -40 degrees Fahrenheit, certain areas of the ship registered inexplicable pockets of warmth, with temperatures reaching 70 degrees. Captain Holder decided to tow the Northern Light to the nearest port. However, shortly after securing the tow lines, smoke began billowing from the cargo hold. The Arctic Guardian's crew barely managed to sever the lines before the Northern Light erupted in a massive explosion. The blast lifted the entire hull out of the water before the ship split apart and vanished beneath the dark, frigid waters of the Pacific. The incident was first officially documented by the U.S. Coast Guard in May 1952, sparking decades of speculation about the crew's fate. Some theorists connected it to classified military experiments, while others suggested supernatural forces. Skeptics questioned whether the ship had ever existed, noting that no vessel named Northern Light appeared in maritime registries. However, research by Norwegian maritime historian Erik Larsen in 1954, supported by testimonies from the Arctic Guardian's crew, revealed intriguing details. The ship had been carrying experimental rocket fuel components, suggesting possible involvement in a classified military operation. This could explain its absence from official records and its location far from regular shipping routes. One theory proposes that seawater had leaked into the cargo hold, creating toxic fumes that poisoned the crew. The same water might have eventually reached volatile compounds, triggering the final explosion. Yet this fails to explain why the rescue party remained unaffected by any lingering gases, or why the deaths appeared so violent and terrifying. Other researchers suggest the ship carried something far more sinister, an experimental biological weapon developed during World War II. Recently declassified documents hint at secret programs by multiple nations to transport captured warfare agents across the Pacific during this period. The symptoms described: the rapid decomposition, the strange temperature variations, the expressions of terror align with certain classified biological agents' effects. The true story of the Northern Light remains neither proven nor disproven. while skeptics dismiss it as another tall tale of the sea. The official Coast Guard documentation and decades of research by maritime historians suggest otherwise. Whether the ship fell victim to a military experiment gone wrong, unknown natural phenomena, or something even more mysterious, its final resting place remains hidden in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, taking its secrets to the grave. The vast expanse of Siberia has long been a treasure trove of myths and legends spanning hundreds of years. Military expeditions and research teams venturing into the endless taiga and frozen wastelands have reported strange occurrences and encounters with inexplicable entities. Their accounts leave us questioning what secrets truly lie beneath the permafrost and dense forests of this mysterious region. For generations, the frozen wilderness and abandoned mining towns of Siberia have been known as the graveyard of lost souls. This haunting nickname has proven remarkably fitting, as countless expeditions have vanished into these treacherous lands, leaving behind nothing but scattered equipment and chilling mysteries. From the ill-fated scientific missions during the Cold War to modern research teams, the region has claimed many lives within its snow-covered expanses and maze-like underground tunnels. In the late 1980s, a classified Soviet research program established numerous secret facilities throughout the region, conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of known science. Their activities drew the attention of an ancient order of local shamans who had protected sacred sites in the area for generations. The shamans formed a secretive organization dedicated to safeguarding their ancestral territories from foreign intrusion. The collapse of the Soviet Union left many of these facilities abandoned, their secrets buried under decades of snow and ice. However, in recent years, international research teams have begun exploring these forgotten sites, leading to a series of inexplicable encounters that defy rational explanation. Lieutenant Maxim Kornev was leading a three-person research team, investigating an abandoned facility near Yakutsk when they encountered something that would forever change their understanding of reality. While examining the facility's perimeter, they spotted several figures climbing over the frozen metal fencing. The team immediately took defensive positions and confronted the intruders, managing to hit one while the others disappeared into the swirling snow. As they approached the fallen figure, one of Kornev's colleagues noticed an unusual shimmer emanating from the body. Suddenly, a stream of crystalline mist began rising from the form, coalescing into a translucent, humanoid shape. The entity stood before them, its eyes glowing with an eerie blue light, before dissolving into countless ice crystals that were swept away by the bitter wind. By 2008, the International Paranormal Research Initiative had established several monitoring stations throughout the region. One such outpost, designated as Station Omega, was situated in a century-old mining complex. The station's most remote observation post, nicknamed the Shaft, would soon become infamous among researchers for its disturbing phenomena. The shaft was located in a partially collapsed mine tunnel, rising nearly 20 feet above the surrounding permafrost. During initial surveys, researchers discovered not only ancient tribal artifacts, but also abandoned Soviet-era equipment. This led to speculation that a team of researchers had vanished in these tunnels during the Cold War, their fate unknown to this day. Within days of establishing the observation post, security personnel began reporting strange occurrences. Equipment malfunctions were common, with batteries dying inexplicably and instruments giving impossible readings. The incidents escalated when younger team members began reporting whispered conversations in Russian echoing through the tunnels. Despite being alone at their posts, Sergeant David Fisher experienced perhaps the most chilling encounter. While manning the post alone, he heard someone cough behind him, followed by words whispered in Russian directly into his ear. After this incident, he refused to return to the shaft, requesting immediate transfer to another location. The situation continued to deteriorate as researchers reported physical encounters with unseen forces. The security detail was doubled, but this did nothing to prevent the appearance of strange, floating orbs of blue light that would approach the observation post before vanishing into the darkness. Captain Igor Volkov reported one of the most detailed encounters. While scanning the horizon one night, he spotted a solitary figure standing motionless in the snow. The entity appeared to be watching him specifically, but when Volkov switched to thermal imaging equipment, the figure vanished. When he lowered the device, the figure had moved significantly closer to his position. This nerve-wracking game of hide and seek continued until the figure was mere feet away. Volkov fired a warning flare and raised his weapon, but found no traces of footprints in the fresh snow where the figure had stood. Moments later, he felt an icy whisper against his ear and was struck with tremendous force, leaving him with severe frostbite-like injuries across his torso. Similar incidents were reported at Station Alpha, where security personnel encountered the spirit of an elderly shaman who would materialize near their posts, performing elaborate rituals before vanishing into the snow. However, these encounters pale in comparison to the terrifying experience of an 8-person international research team tasked with investigating unusual energy readings from a remote village in the Sayan Mountains. After 2 days of observation, their communications equipment began failing mysteriously. As they attempted to relocate to restore contact with headquarters, the team was overwhelmed by a deep, resonating hum that seemed to penetrate their very bones. Unable to proceed, they were forced to make camp until the sound subsided. In the ensuing silence, one of their lookouts spotted a pale figure moving through the trees. Through their equipment, they observed what appeared to be an elderly man in traditional Siberian clothing. But the figure cast no thermal signature and seemed to hover slightly above the snow-covered ground, passing through solid objects as if they were mere illusions. The team watched in horror as one of the entity's arms suddenly detached, falling to the ground. The figure calmly retrieved the limb, which seemed to melt back into its body like mercury. Their terror was interrupted by sudden lights and shouting from the direction of the village. The entity turned its attention toward the commotion and began moving in that direction. The research team retreated immediately, making their way back to the nearest safe zone. When a heavily armed security team returned to the village 2 days later, they found the hideously mutilated remains of the village's entire population. The bodies had been torn apart with impossible force, their remains frozen solid despite the relatively mild temperature. While many such accounts can be dismissed as the product of isolation extreme conditions, and psychological stress, it becomes more difficult to discount incidents witnessed by multiple trained observers and supported by physical evidence. One such case occurred in 2002, when a research team vanished while investigating anomalous readings in an abandoned mining complex, prompting the deployment of an elite rescue unit. Following a trail of scattered equipment and disturbing signs of violence, the rescue team discovered a series of ancient tunnels leading to a massive underground chamber. There they found the remains of the missing researchers, their bodies showing signs of incredible trauma. Before they could secure the scene, one of their members was impaled by a crude spear that had been hurled from the darkness with inhuman force. What emerged from the shadows defied explanation. The creature stood nearly 13 feet tall, covered in thick white fur and wearing fragments of ancient ceremonial armor. As it attempted to retrieve its weapon, the team opened fire with everything they had, eventually bringing down the monstrosity. Examination of the creature revealed multiple anomalies: six-fingered hands, razor-sharp teeth, and a skeletal structure unlike anything known to science. The creature's remains, weighing over 1,000 pounds, were transported to a secure facility for analysis. The retrieval team reported that the specimen emanated an intense cold that nearly disabled their aircraft systems during transport. While governments continue to deny the existence of such entities, the sheer volume of consistent reports from trained observers suggests that something truly extraordinary lurks in the vast Siberian wilderness. As modern exploration pushes deeper into these untamed regions, we may find that the ancient legends of shamanic spirits and mysterious creatures contain more truth than we ever imagined. Just as we continue to discover new species in the depths of our oceans and the heart of our rainforests, perhaps the endless taiga and frozen wastes of Siberia harbor secrets that challenge our understanding of reality itself. Nearly 20 years have passed since the last human expedition set foot on the red sands of Mars. While official statements cite budget constraints and technological limitations as the primary reasons for this prolonged absence, a growing number of voices suggest something far more unsettling lies at the heart of this mysterious withdrawal from Martian exploration. Between 2040 and 2045, the International Space Alliance successfully completed 4 manned missions to the Martian surface through their ambitious Horizon program. The final mission, Horizon 4, concluded on December 3, 2045, when the crew Marcus Reeves, Isabella Torres, and Aidan Frost made their safe return to Earth aboard the recovery vessel Atlantic Guardian. Despite plans for 3 additional missions and the construction of a permanent research base, all manned expeditions to Mars ceased abruptly. The official narrative points to shifting economic priorities and political tensions between the Alliance and emerging private space corporations. The program's costs had ballooned from an initial estimate of 50 billion credits to well over 150 billion. The limited duration of surface operations, no more than 14 days per mission due to radiation exposure limits, made it increasingly difficult to justify such enormous expenditure. Yet beneath this conventional explanation lies a web of disturbing accounts and inexplicable incidents. Throughout the years following the Horizon program's sudden termination, multiple crew members have come forward with stories that challenge our understanding of Mars. They speak of unusual formations in the sand that appeared and disappeared overnight, unexplained lights moving across the crimson sky, and most disturbingly, vast geometric structures glimpsed through dust storms that seemed to vanish when approached. In 2060, an anonymous post appeared on the global network, claiming to be from a former medical officer who had treated returning Horizon crews. The source alleged that Horizon 4 wasn't simply the last successful mission. It was the mission that encountered something that changed everything. According to this testimony, while exploring a deep canyon near Olympus Mons, the crew discovered the wreckage of an unregistered spacecraft. The vessel bore no official markings, but its design suggested it belonged to the Aurora Corporation, a private space enterprise that had supposedly abandoned its Mars program years earlier. The disturbing detail wasn't just the presence of this secret mission, but the condition of the craft and its crew. The vessel appeared to have been systematically dismantled from the outside, its reinforced hull peeled away like layers of an onion. The crew members found inside had suffered inexplicable failures of their environmental suits, not from impacts or decompressions, but from what seemed to be precise, purposeful breaches. A joint investigation by the European Space Agency and the Asian Space Coalition allegedly reached the crash site in 2050. Dr. Maya Patel, a specialist in xenoarchaeology, was brought in to analyze the findings. The mission successfully landed near the coordinates from Horizon 4's logs, only to experience a series of catastrophic system failures. Their last transmission, received by the Ganymede station, contained fragments of panicked voices describing moving shadows and impossible geometries in the Martian dust. During Horizon 2's orbital phase, pilot Isabella Torres and science officer Aidan Frost reported an anomaly that has fueled decades of speculation. While passing over the Valles Marineris, they detected what they described as crystalline harmonics, a series of mathematical patterns in the background radiation that defied natural explanation. Mission Control dismissed the phenomenon as instrument malfunction, but subsequent analysis of the raw data suggested otherwise. The most compelling evidence of something unusual on Mars comes from Horizon 3's exploration of the Noctis labyrinthus region. The crew's geologic survey revealed a network of perfectly straight tunnels extending kilometers below the surface. More intriguingly, their seismic equipment recorded patterns of movement that suggested large-scale mechanical activity deep within the planet. When they deployed subsurface probes, the devices returned data showing vast empty chambers that shouldn't exist at those depths. William Parker, a former Horizon program communications specialist, broke his silence in 2055 with an astonishing claim about Horizon 1. During the critical first landing, Commander Marcus Reeves switched to the medical monitoring channel and reported something that never made it to the official transcripts. He described what appeared to be artificial structures rising from the Martian soil, geometric forms that seemed to shimmer and shift when viewed directly. These structures reportedly housed what Reeves called activities of obvious technological origin. The Horizon 1 crew allegedly captured extensive footage of these anomalies. But within days of their return, nearly 60% of their visual data was quarantined under the pretense of radiation damage. Reeves, who passed away in 2058, reportedly confided in close friends that the structures they encountered appeared to be actively monitoring human presence on Mars. He believed they were automated systems left behind by something that still maintained a presence beneath the planet's surface. Recent robotic missions have provided their own mysterious data points. The Pathfinder 7 rover photographed what appears to be regular patterns of light emerging from certain craters during dust storms. The Chinese Tianwen-4 orbiter detected unusual energy signatures that some scientists argue could indicate massive electromagnetic activity deep within the planet. Some researchers have proposed an even more radical theory that Mars itself might be more than just a natural celestial body. They point to peculiar aspects of its composition and orbit that suggest artificial modification in the distant past. Seismic data from Horizon missions revealed that certain parts of the planet produce echo patterns consistent with enormous hollow spaces, leading to speculation about the possibility of engineered structures spanning thousands of kilometers beneath the surface. When Horizon 3 deliberately crashed their spent descent stage into a specific region of interest, the impact produced resonance patterns that continued for over 3 hours. The planet seemed to ring with a regularity that suggested internal structures far more complex than natural geological formations would allow. As we examine the accumulated evidence from the Horizon program, it becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss all these incidents as mere equipment malfunctions or psychological stress. While some cases certainly could be attributed to the extreme conditions and challenges of Mars exploration, others resist conventional explanation. The truth about what the Horizon crews encountered on Mars remains elusive. Perhaps future missions will finally provide definitive answers about the strange phenomena that seem to guard the red planet's secrets. Until then, we can only hope that, if there is indeed something watching us from Mars, its intentions align with peaceful coexistence in our solar system. Only time will tell if humanity's return to Mars will unlock these mysteries, or if some questions are better left unanswered in the crimson sands of our mysterious planetary neighbor. If you travel to the frozen north today, you're in for a grim surprise. If you travel to the frozen north today, you'd better go well disguised. For when the earth is frozen solid and blanketed in white, you might find yourself in the hunting grounds of the frost stalker. According to ancient Sami legend, there was a dark and malevolent entity which possessed the power to control the minds of men and women. This creature stalked its victims during the coldest months, entering their dreams and drawing them out into the snow until they were lost and desperate for warmth. Once the victim's life force began to fade, there was no turning back. They would forever be transformed into a horrifying, being one which constantly craved human warmth with a hunger that was never satisfied. They would become what is known as a frost stalker, born of the indigenous Sami people that inhabited the harshest regions of northern Scandinavia. The frost stalker is a legend of dual nature. Its name refers to both the evil entity which possesses its victims, and the physical creature they become after surrendering to the cold. The entity was attracted to two distinct types of people: those who were arrogant and selfish, and those who were vulnerable and freezing. It was said to haunt people in their sleep, filling their dreams with visions of warmth and comfort, luring them away from safety and into the deadly cold, starting with those they held dearest. The physical frost stalker, however, was far more terrifying. These were the remnants of those possessed by the entity, typically encountered in remote, snow-covered forests. They were described as unusually tall and emaciated, with bluish-white skin stretched tight over their bones. Their faces were recognizably human, but severely distorted, with hollow cheeks, eyes like frozen ponds, and cracked lips that had withered away, revealing jagged icicle teeth. Their fingers were long and slender, ending in translucent claws of ice, which were used to drain the warmth from their victims. Frost stalkers were said to be swift, powerful, and silent, able to pursue their targets across vast distances through the snow. They had been known to mimic the voices of loved ones, calling out in the blizzard to draw wanderers deeper into the wilderness. Although this was originally a folk tale used to explain the dangers of winter, the bitter cold, starvation, and the perils of isolation, as well as condemning selfishness, it has since evolved into something more substantial. Classified as a contemporary cryptid, people continue to report encounters with frost stalkers to this day. The question remains whether the legend is influencing these sightings, or if people are using the legend to make sense of something else they've witnessed. Finding reliable reports of these encounters proved challenging, as there are few well-documented incidents on record. But we did manage to uncover some accounts. None of the stories we are about to share is supported by concrete evidence. They are purely anecdotal, but intriguing nonetheless. The first of these encounters takes place in Finnish Lapland, near Lake Inari, submitted to an online forum in March of 2015. The user, Marcus Lindgren, states that he and his wife had relocated to the area the previous summer. The property came with about 5 hectares of land and was primarily surrounded by dense pine forest. They spent their first few months renovating the rustic cabin before settling in for what would prove to be an exceptionally harsh winter. The snowfall at the beginning of that year was the deepest the region had experienced in a generation. Their nearest neighbors lived about 3 kilometers further along Route 71, and the constant whiteout conditions only intensified their sense of isolation, though they actually enjoyed the solitude. The sun would disappear just after 3 p.m. during those midwinter evenings, and with the normal forest sounds muffled by the snow, an eerie deep blue twilight enveloped everything. Night after night around midnight on the 21st of January, Marcus reports that he was awakened by one of his dogs barking and pawing frantically at the front door. Assuming it needed to relieve itself, he left his wife sleeping and made his way downstairs. As soon as he opened the door, the dog bolted for the tree line surrounding the property, growling and barking at something in the darkness beyond. No matter how many times he called her back, she kept running without even glancing toward the house. After hurriedly pulling on his snow boots and grabbing a flashlight, he ran across his yard and soon found himself standing at the forest's edge, calling her name and shining his light between the trees. He could hear branches snapping in the distance as his dog moved through the underbrush, still growling and barking at whatever she sensed was there. But then suddenly, everything went quiet. He took a cautious step just inside the tree line and stood motionless for a moment, listening. There wasn't even a whisper on the wind. He advanced a few more steps, called again, and still heard nothing. He recounted that he must have walked another 7 meters before he found himself among a cluster of silver birch trees. And that's when he heard it. Kultasny. It was his wife's voice coming from behind him. He turned around, fully expecting to see her standing at the edge of the tree line, but there was no one there. Then he heard it a second time. Kultasny. At this point, he realized something was very wrong. Like before, it sounded as if it came from behind him, but now it was from deeper within the forest. He directed his flashlight into the branches, sweeping back and forth, when he suddenly noticed movement about 3 meters ahead of him. What he initially thought were branches straightened up to reveal a long, slender figure. When the beam passed over its face, the eyes reflected no light. They were just frozen, hollow orbs. He had no time to process what he was seeing as he turned and sprinted back toward the cabin, bursting from the tree line and racing across his open yard. Only when he reached his front door and found his dog sitting there waiting for him did he look back. But there was nothing there. When he went inside, he discovered his wife still soundly asleep in bed. Marcus ended his post saying, "I don't know if what I saw was a frost stalker, but it matches the description. It could have been a ghost or even some kind of alien. It might have been my imagination, but the sound of my wife's voice and those eyes. It was very real to me. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I can tell you that I haven't ventured back into those woods since." Later that same year, a man named Olaf Thorvaldsson would have a chilling experience while working in Femundsmarka National Park, Norway. Olaf worked as a forestry ranger, clearing and marking paths through the dense woodland in preparation for the summer tourist season. Unlike many of his colleagues, he lived far from the main office and often spent his weekends in a remote ranger station while everyone else returned to civilization. During December, the first heavy snows began to blanket the region, and it was just after 9 p.m. on the weekend of the 15th that Olaf would receive an unwelcome visitor. As he recalls, the snow was falling heavily, and he had just added another log to the wood stove. He was climbing back into his bunk to continue reading his book when he was startled by a heavy thud on the roof. After a brief moment of alarm, he reasoned that a clump of snow must have fallen from the branches of the pine tree overhanging the station, and thought nothing more of it. But about 5 minutes later, he was disturbed again, this time by a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound above his head. Again, he quickly dismissed it. Either some branches were scraping across the roof, or perhaps a wolverine had decided to brave the elements in search of food. In any case, the sound ceased abruptly after a few more minutes, and after another hour or so, Olaf decided to turn over and go to sleep. He had just closed his eyes when he was jolted awake by another loud thud, then another, and another, and another, and then silence. Olaf remembered a shiver running up his spine, as it sounded exactly like someone walking across the roof of the station. It was definitely not a wolverine. The thuds had been too heavy, and they sounded distinctly bipedal. He considered that someone might be playing a prank, but then he remembered just how isolated he was and wondered who could possibly be out there at that hour and in such weather. He knew he needed to investigate, but felt understandably apprehensive. For several minutes, he sat looking out of his window, hoping to detect any movement. Given the frigid temperatures, he was already fully dressed. He pulled on his boots, opened the door, and cautiously stepped out onto the porch. There he stood in the silent night, as the snow fell without a sound, knowing that something was out there watching him. There was nothing on the roof, but his attention was drawn to the high branches of a nearby pine. He couldn't distinguish anything in the darkness, and he never understood why, but for some inexplicable reason, he had the most overwhelming feeling that there was a presence observing him. He reached for his flashlight, but something prevented him. Somewhere in the recesses of his mind, he heard a voice warning him that if he illuminated the darkness, he would not survive until morning. Instead, he turned around and went back inside, securing the door behind him. Hours passed with no further disturbances, but he had been so unnerved by what he sensed that he couldn't even close his eyes. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him. He awoke several hours later, and looking out the window, was relieved to see that the first light of dawn was beginning to appear. The scene outside was peaceful and still, but in the half-light, he noticed on the porch just outside the door bare humanoid footprints in the fresh snow. And in that moment, he knew that something had been watching him while he slept. Although Olaf didn't actually see anything that night, when his colleagues returned the following Monday and he shared his experience, most of them laughed it off. A few, however, were deadly serious when they informed him that he had been visited by a frost stalker. Our final account comes from Eirik Gunnarsson, whose experience was published in a local newspaper nearly 25 years ago. Eirik was a hunter from Östersund, Sweden, born in 1939. He had spent decades hunting in the forests of Jämtland County. During that time, he had become thoroughly accustomed to the wilderness. He had heard numerous strange tales about the northern forests. He had even heard unusual sounds on previous expeditions, but he had never witnessed anything out of the ordinary and dismissed the stories he had been told. Relatives described him as an honest, practical man with a straightforward approach to his pursuits. The account of his encounter was published some years after his death and was submitted by his daughter Astrid. It occurred in December 1983, while her father was on a hunting trip in the remote forests of Jämtland. Eirik was 3 days into this particular expedition when he experienced something he was never able to explain, and which prevented him from hunting alone for many years afterward. It was early afternoon, and progress had been difficult. He had tracked a large elk for quite some distance over challenging terrain which was covered in deep snow. He finally spotted his target when he approached the edge of a large clearing. Being some distance away and downwind of the animal, he had time to be patient as he carefully moved into position and aimed his Husqvarna rifle. When he finally took the shot, he was disappointed to see the elk flinch and then dash into the trees beyond. He had struck it in the side, but his aim had been slightly off. Still, if it was wounded, it would soon succumb to its injuries, and all Eirik had to do from that point was follow the trail of blood. He was about halfway across the clearing when things began to feel strange. He described the air seeming to turn heavy and dull, and everything becoming eerily silent. All the typical forest sounds vanished, and he was suddenly overcome by an unusual sense of exposure, as if he was being watched. He continued forward, but not without considerable unease. Just inside the tree line on the opposite side of the clearing, he saw the elk lying on its side, its flanks heaving as warm breath, visible in the frigid air, escaped from its nostrils. He approached to within 10 meters of the dying animal, hunting knife in hand, when he noticed something unusual just behind the elk. There was a mass of pale blue-white which at first glance resembled a drift of snow. But now he could see that it was moving, as if attached to the wounded elk. He advanced just a few steps closer before stopping completely. His jaw dropped as he watched an inhuman face rise up from behind his kill. It had frost around its mouth, and according to Eirik, wore the most malevolent expression he had ever encountered. It suddenly shifted into a protective stance, crouching over the elk as if claiming it. It then emitted a high-pitched howl that sounded like wind through an ice cave, which was enough to send Eirik running for the opposite side of the clearing. He managed to return to his camp and cut his trip short. As far as his daughter knew, Eirik never hunted in those woods again. When describing the creature, her father recalled that it was incredibly gaunt, and even though it was crouched low, he could tell it was unnaturally tall. Its skin was almost as pale blue-white as the snow around it. He would often recount this story to his closest family, even as he was dying from lung cancer in his final days. He would share this tale one last time with absolute conviction. So what are we to make of these accounts? Are they merely fabricated stories? Or did these individuals actually encounter something in the northern forests? For us, the main issue with alleged frost stalker sightings is that we know this entity is simply a legend. In the original folklore, the frost stalker did not possess a physical form at all. It existed only as a spiritual force. Its material manifestation only developed later, and even then, there are multiple descriptions regarding its appearance. While most Sami traditions described it as portrayed in this account, others claimed it resembled a frost-covered mountain troll. And particularly in recent years, and especially since the digital age, modern descriptions suggest that it has a crown of icicles and glowing blue eyes. Unlike some other folkloric creatures, frost stalkers cannot change their form. So these inconsistencies in appearance only further challenge the credibility of its physical existence. Before modern medicine, many illnesses and psychological conditions were attributed to malevolent spirits. And with this in mind, it's easy to understand how the legend persisted. Northern Scandinavia experiences brutally cold winters, and there would certainly have been periods when food was scarce in such harsh conditions. This perhaps led some individuals to become so desperate that they ventured out unprepared, becoming lost and succumbing to hypothermia, an occurrence viewed as a terrible fate. It's possible that the legend originated from a need to both explain and prevent these tragedies, as well as to establish values against selfishness and hoarding of resources, encouraging people instead to share their provisions for the community's welfare. That said, could people be encountering something real in the forests and incorrectly associating these experiences with the frost stalker? After all, the wilderness areas of northern Europe are incredibly vast, with regions that remain largely unexplored. It's not difficult to imagine the possibility of some unknown entity still existing deep within those remote areas, or possibly something else entirely non-human. There are some recorded testimonies which might suggest this possibility, and while they may be nothing more than fabrications, they are rather compelling. All the records we are about to discuss have been linked to possible frost stalker encounters. This audio recording was discovered in 1979 and captures a group of hikers at a remote cabin. At one point, an unusual vocalization is heard, just as a humanoid figure is allegedly recorded moving on all fours in the background, circling around the campsite. The recording could be authentic. However, we find it unusual that there appears to be little reaction from the group, despite the clear sounds of something approaching. Also, the way the recording device seems to be positioned toward the forest, rather than focusing on the conversation around the fire, makes this seem somewhat staged. The following was documented in January 2011 and describes a team of researchers exploring an abandoned weather station. They begin to hear strange sounds coming from another part of the building, and when they investigate, they encounter something that sends them fleeing. The account is somewhat vague, and we don't get a clear description of what they saw. The whole situation seems contrived and follows predictable patterns, so we believe this is likely fabricated. The next piece of evidence was a photograph taken in 2003 at a remote cemetery surrounded by pine forest, and the photographer only noticed something unusual when he examined the image 6 years after it was taken. It appears to show a humanoid figure peering from behind a headstone, which many people have described as having inhuman features, while others have identified it as a frost stalker. The time gap between capturing and analyzing the photo is interesting, but it could easily be someone standing behind the grave marker, positioning a mannequin in the frame before removing it when the camera moves. This final record was found in a journal from the mid-1990s. No one has claimed ownership of the writing, and the author has never been identified. It describes a couple hiking through the forest and coming face to face with a strange entity, which then proceeds to pursue them. The journal entry ends abruptly. If this is a hoax, it is very convincingly written, but a potential clue is the description of the creature's sounds, which are remarkably detailed and dramatic compared to the practical tone of the rest of the writing. When all is said and done, it appears the legend of the frost stalker is precisely that, a legend. It endures today in Sami folklore and internet horror stories. It also gives its name to an actual medical condition known as frost stalker syndrome, where the sufferer develops an irrational fear of freezing to death or becoming lost in winter conditions. And for most people, that's as real as it gets. On the other hand, we can't help but wonder whether the legend evolved from deeper truths. Was there something more that the Sami people understood? Could there be something waiting in those frozen forests? What secrets lie hidden beneath the Earth's surface, in the vast network of underground lakes, rivers, and caverns that honeycomb our planet's crust? Could ancient creatures, long believed extinct, still thrive in these lightless realms? Or might strange beings, as elusive as they are mysterious, inhabit these subterranean waters. There is definitely something down there. The question is, what? The underground waterways that thread through our planet's bedrock are as fascinating as they are enigmatic. Humans have long been drawn to these hidden aquatic realms that permeate the Earth's crust. They represent one of the last true frontiers of exploration on our planet, seeding our wildest dreams and fueling our darkest fears. We have barely scratched the surface of this mysterious underground world. In fact, more people have reached the summit of Mount Everest than have explored the deepest underground river systems. Despite centuries of cave exploration, 90% of Earth's underground water systems remain unmapped. Of the thousands of new species discovered each year, a significant portion emerge from these subterranean environments. This striking fact points to an ominous truth. There could be countless unknown creatures still lurking in those depths. For generations, cave explorers have reported terrifying encounters with various underground monsters, with perhaps the most infamous being the legendary giant cave serpent of the Piku Caves. In modern times, these accounts have largely been dismissed as tall tales told to frighten novice cavers or discourage illegal exploration. But you may be surprised to learn that sightings of so-called cave and underground lake monsters are as common today as they were in years past. Interest in this subject experienced a dramatic surge in 2016 when unusual seismic vibrations were detected deep within the Blue Hall Cave system by the International Underground Research Organization. The signal was so powerful it was picked up by monitoring stations over 50 miles away. Scientists referred to it simply as the pulse, and initially suspected it must have been produced by some massive unknown creature moving through the cave system. By 2018, researchers had concluded it was merely the sound of an underground river carving out new passages. However, imaginations had already been captured, and people began taking stories of underground monsters more seriously. The legend of the giant cave serpent dates back thousands of years. Ancient Sanskrit texts mention a similar creature, but it was Professor Richard Waterman's 2012 book, Secrets of the Underground Rivers, that first described one in detail. Waterman wrote that according to local cave guides, it was large enough to swallow a small boat whole, and its body was long enough to block entire underground passages. These accounts were generally treated skeptically, and no serious scientist gave them much credence. However, in 2019, the story began shifting from folklore to scientific investigation. Dr. Margaret Stone examined mysterious scale-like impressions discovered in limestone deposits deep within the dark water caverns. Each impression was over 12 inches wide, far larger than any known cave-dwelling creature. She could only estimate the full size of whatever left these marks. But when she later discovered similar impressions in underwater caves in 3 different locations, she famously declared that the giant cave serpent might be more than just legend. In recent years, previously unknown species of cave-dwelling amphibians have been documented growing up to 6 feet in length. Some expert estimations suggest they could potentially reach sizes of 10 feet or more in the deepest, most isolated cave systems. It's remarkable that the first live specimens of these creatures were only photographed as recently as 2021. But could they really be responsible for the ancient legends. It seems unlikely. These amphibians have never been observed in the larger cave chambers. They prefer narrow fissures at depths of between 200 and 500 feet. While they may appear fearsome, they primarily hunt smaller prey and are relatively docile creatures. The giant cave serpent appears to have been an exaggeration of their size and nature. But what else might be down there? After all, the legend existed long before we discovered these giant amphibians. So one might question what actually inspired these tales. In 2020, a tracking device attached to experienced cave diver Michael Drake was found washed up in a cave outflow in the Piku system. This was just 2 weeks after, and only a mile away from where he had begun his exploration. Conservation officials analyzed the data stored in the device and discovered something disturbing. During those first 2 weeks, Drake had been methodically mapping the underwater passages, rarely exceeding depths of 300 feet. However, at 2:15 a.m. on November 12th, the tracker showed him suddenly descending over a previously unknown vertical shaft to a depth of 600 feet in under 60 seconds, far faster than any diver could safely descend. Initial speculation suggested the device had simply detached, but this was quickly ruled out. If Drake couldn't have descended that rapidly, the device certainly wouldn't have sunk that fast on its own. More significantly, during the descent, the temperature remained steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, much warmer than the 52 degrees recorded during his previous dives. Given that the water should have grown colder at greater depths, if the device had simply fallen, it should have registered decreasing temperatures. When the tracker was examined, it was found to be corroded by an unknown chemical substance, suggesting it had been exposed to something other than normal cave water. This final detail led some to conclude that Drake might have been attacked by something large enough to swallow both him and his equipment. The question was, what? Some theorized he had become trapped in a powerful underground current, but the cave system's hydrology didn't support this explanation. 10 months later, speleologists believed they had solved the mystery, proposing that a massive underwater cave collapse had occurred. However, this theory also had problems. Firstly, no evidence of such a collapse was found during subsequent surveys. Secondly, the temperature readings remained inconsistent with any known geological process. Finally, similar incidents had been reported in the same cave system, dating back to 1972. These inconsistencies led some researchers to suggest that an unknown predatory species might inhabit these depths. The speculation intensified in 2021 when a scientific expedition in the Silent Depths cave complex had a frightening encounter with something extraordinary. Dr. Alex Fisher reported in the expedition log what happened on August 15th. Their team had been setting up underwater monitoring equipment when their most powerful light beam illuminated something massive moving through a large chamber, nearly 800 feet below the surface. Fisher described what they saw. The creature appeared to be over 40 feet in length, with a serpentine body and multiple appendages. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it moved with surprising agility for its size. Most disturbing were its features. A large, flattened head with what appeared to be primitive eye sockets. The entire team witnessed this, and our equipment recorded a significant temperature anomaly at the same moment. If Fisher's account, which was corroborated by his team members and sensor data, is accurate, then what they encountered sounds remarkably similar to prehistoric amphibians thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago. Similar creatures have reportedly been seen in deep cave systems across the globe as recently as 2023, with multiple sightings documented by professional cavers and scientists alike. The scientific community generally dismisses these reports as misidentification of known cave-dwelling species. However, this explanation seems inadequate given that many eyewitnesses describe creatures exceeding 30 feet in length, far larger than any known modern amphibian. But these alleged underground monsters aren't limited to prehistoric animals. In early 2024, a research team exploring the newly discovered Abyss Cave complex reported encountering something even more extraordinary. The team's underwater cameras captured images of a large, humanoid figure moving through the darkness, nearly 400 feet below the surface. The being appeared to be roughly 12 feet tall, with elongated limbs and webbed appendages. Its skin was ghostly white, and it displayed clear signs of advanced adaptation to underground aquatic life. Because of its disturbing human-like characteristics, the research team designated it Echo Walker. Multiple sightings have been reported since, primarily in the deepest sections of various cave systems, leading some to speculate that an unknown species of cave-adapted humanoids might exist in these lightless realms. Photographic evidence exists, but the extreme conditions and poor visibility in these environments mean that most footage is inconclusive. If the Echo Walkers do exist, some researchers suggest they could represent an entirely new branch of underground evolved vertebrates. Of course, such sightings aren't limited to remote cave systems. There are numerous underground rivers throughout the world, thought to harbor unknown creatures. One of the most compelling cases emerged recently beneath the Carpathian Mountains. A series of remarkable sonar readings taken in 2023 revealed something massive moving through the underground river network. The readings suggested an organism at least 30 feet in length, displaying movement patterns unlike any known cave-dwelling species. Within the same week, 3 separate research teams reported unusual disturbances in different sections of the underground river system. Their observations described large, dark shapes moving against the current, accompanied by unexpected temperature fluctuations and unusual bioelectric readings. Wildlife experts were particularly intrigued by these incidents, as the depth and isolation of these water systems make them ideal harbors for relict species, living fossils that might have survived unchanged for millions of years. So what are we to make of all these underground water monsters? Is there any truth to these sightings? Or should we dismiss them all as misidentification and imagination? While there isn't enough concrete evidence to prove the existence of any of these creatures, the vast network of unexplored cave systems remains so inaccessible and mysterious that they might as well be on another planet. We simply don't know what lurks in those lightless depths. We cannot deny that the potential existence of unknown creatures in our underground waters has captured human imagination. There appears to be much left to discover, and possibly much more to fear. The next time you stand near a cave entrance or underground spring, take a moment to consider what might be moving through the darkness beneath your feet. On a bitter cold night in February, 5 young men mysteriously vanished from their warm car, venturing into the darkness of the Oregon wilderness. Their disappearance would become one of the most perplexing mysteries in Pacific Northwest history, leaving investigators and families searching for answers that seemed lost in the depths of the forest. The pungent scent of decay permeated the crisp mountain air as 3 motorcyclists pulled off the main trail. It was early June 1983, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the towering Douglas firs. After a long day of riding, they had decided to investigate an odd cluster of buildings nestled in a secluded clearing just beyond the tree line. Before them stood a weather-worn meteorological station, a main building flanked by 4 smaller structures. Such stations weren't uncommon in this part of Oregon, positioned strategically across the wilderness for monitoring weather patterns and collecting atmospheric data. Most were regularly staffed, but this remote outpost had clearly been abandoned to the elements, or so they thought. The nauseating odor grew stronger as the riders removed their helmets. 2 of them recognized it immediately, the unmistakable smell of death. They initially assumed it was a dead animal decomposing in the summer heat, the stench enough to make one of them retch. They might have left right then, but the broken window in the main building caught their attention. Peering through the shattered glass revealed little at first, just some dusty workstations and weather monitoring equipment untouched for months. The door yielded easily to their push, unlocked and slightly ajar. What they discovered inside would haunt them forever. A body lay on a cot in the back room, covered with 8 thick blankets, swarming with flies. None of the riders could have known they had just stumbled upon the first piece of a tragic puzzle, one that would come to be known as the Oregon Mountain Mystery. This discovery would lead investigators down a winding path of confusion and heartbreak, with more questions than answers at every turn. The authorities, already en route, had a sinking suspicion about the identity of the deceased. Their fears were confirmed upon arrival. The body belonged to one of 5 young men who had vanished 4 months earlier in the dead of winter. But the evidence before them defied logic. As the investigation unfolded, nearly every detail would seem to contradict the next, leaving them with a modern mystery as perplexing as any in the annals of American history. To understand this enigma, we must return to where it all began, the early evening of Friday, February 18th, 1983. The winter air in Portland, Oregon hung heavy with the promise of snow as 25-year-old Michael Donovan sat at his kitchen table, hurriedly finishing his dinner. Between bites of his mother's meatloaf, he kept glancing eagerly out the window at the empty street, anticipating the arrival of his friends. Earlier that evening, 32-year-old Robert Bob Peterson had rushed downstairs for dinner, wolfing down his food at an alarming pace. Minutes later, the sound of a car horn brought him running to the door. Despite his grandmother Martha's insistence that he take a coat, Peterson darted out into the cold night air. In the driveway sat a 1975 Plymouth Fury, with David Morrison, 29, behind the wheel. Alex Fisher, 24, occupied the passenger seat, while 27-year-old Peter O'Reilly sat in the back. Peterson jumped in, and they headed to pick up Donovan before setting out on their 2-hour journey to Portland State University. Each of them shared an intense passion for basketball, following both local games and professional matches whenever possible. They even played on their own team, the Portland Pioneers, and had a crucial game scheduled for the following day. It was the latest in a series of regional tournaments that could qualify them for the upcoming Special Olympics, promising a trip to Seattle if they secured victory. What made this case particularly poignant was that all 5 men faced various mental and developmental challenges. They were part of the Portland Rehabilitation Center's vocational program, where they learned trade skills while playing on the center's basketball team. Bob Peterson, the eldest, had the cognitive development of a young child, but possessed a warm, friendly nature that endeared him to everyone he met. His closest friend was Peter O'Reilly, who shared his childlike wonder and deep religious faith. Alex Fisher, though the shortest at 5 feet 9 inches, had a subtle charm that emerged when he felt comfortable. He and Peterson were inseparable, with the older man often acting as his protector and spokesperson. David Morrison had served in the Navy, but received a medical discharge. Though not diagnosed with any specific disability, those who knew him described him as having a slower processing speed than most. Still, he managed to obtain a driver's license and took great pride in his Plymouth Fury. Michael Donovan had also served in the military, stationed in South Korea. But after a stress-induced breakdown in 1980, he was diagnosed with severe PTSD and honorably discharged. He'd been taking prescribed medication for 3 years, showing remarkable improvement, and even securing a job at his stepfather's construction company. During the drive to Portland, the friends chatted excitedly about their upcoming game. Their families had laid out their uniforms that evening, ready for what should have been their big moment the next day. Tragically, they would never get to play that game. That night, through a mysterious chain of events, all 5 men would vanish into the darkness of the Oregon wilderness. When none of them returned home that evening, their worried families began calling each other and the police. This behavior was completely out of character. None of them were prone to staying out late without notice. Even Donovan, who occasionally spent evenings with other veterans, always called his mother if he would be late. The police quickly issued a missing persons bulletin, and soon information began trickling in from Portland. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing them at the basketball game, and several recalled seeing Morrison's distinctive Plymouth Fury leaving the university parking lot afterward. A convenience store clerk reported them buying snacks, milk, and sodas just before closing time. As the first snowflakes began to fall, police launched a widespread search, led by Portland Detective Marcus Reynolds, who had known Peterson since high school. Reynolds took the case personally, expanding the search into the surrounding Mount Hood National Forest area. His determination paid off when news came that Morrison's Plymouth had been found on a remote Forest Service road, 70 miles from Portland, on February 22nd. The car was buried in several inches of snow, but had been carefully parked on the shoulder. Inside, they found snack wrappers scattered across the seats, and 4 maps neatly folded in the glove compartment. The vehicle was in perfect working order, though the keys were missing. Puzzlingly, Nearly a quarter tank of gas remained, more than enough to have driven back to Portland. With mechanical failure and empty fuel tank ruled out, investigators wondered what had compelled 5 men to abandon a perfectly good vehicle on a freezing winter night. Further searches were hampered by continuing snowstorms, forcing authorities to postpone additional efforts until spring. For Reynolds, the investigation became an obsession. He pursued every lead, no matter how unlikely, while the families offered rewards for information. Tips poured in daily alleged sightings from Seattle to San Diego, each one leading nowhere. Then came the breakthrough in early June, when 3 motorcyclists discovered the body in the abandoned weather station. The deceased was identified as Bob Peterson, who appeared to have died from exposure despite being wrapped in multiple blankets. His 200-pound frame had wasted to nearly half its original weight, suggesting weeks of starvation. Even more baffling, Peterson's shoes were missing, and his feet showed severe frostbite damage. The length of his unkempt beard indicated he had survived for nearly 8 weeks, yet he had never left the cot. Investigators found several empty military-style food ration packets on the floor, evidence that he had eaten at some point. They also discovered an unlocked storage cabinet containing enough freeze-dried food to sustain several people for months, completely untouched. Detective Reynolds was stunned to find no attempt had been made to light a fire, despite an abundance of matches and paper materials that could have served as fuel. Most perplexing of all, a propane tank behind the station was full and operational. It could have provided heat for weeks, yet no one had activated it. The next day, search teams found David Morrison's body 11 miles from the station, near the road leading back toward the car. Evidence suggested he had died while walking, his remains partially scavenged by wildlife. His favorite watch remained clutched in his intact hand. Across the road, scattered bones later identified as Peter O'Reilly's remains were found spread across a wooded area, along with shreds of his distinctive clothing. The devastating news of 3 deaths rocked the Portland community. 2 days later, against Reynolds' advice, Alex Fisher's father joined the search and made the heartbreaking discovery of his son's remains. First a vertebra and some clothing, then additional bones confirmed through dental records. Michael Donovan's whereabouts remained a mystery, causing particular concern due to his need for medication. His shoes were found in the weather station, suggesting he had been there with Peterson and had possibly traded them for his friend's larger boots when frostbite swelled his feet. To this day, Donovan's body has never been found. Investigators theorized that the men had become lost while driving and abandoned their car as the snowstorm intensified. They apparently walked over 20 miles through treacherous mountain terrain before finding the weather station. Once inside, they searched for food and heat, but failed to locate the stored supplies or activate the propane system. With Peterson's condition deteriorating, Morrison, O'Reilly, and Fisher may have left to seek help, leaving Donovan to care for their friend. If they departed around the time the blizzard struck on February 22nd, it would have been their final mistake. If Donovan had indeed stayed behind, he might have later attempted to find his friends. A quarter-mile northwest of the station, searchers found 3 blankets and a corroded flashlight, suggesting he may have tried to bring warmth to his companions but became lost in the attempt. The central question remained: why had they driven so far into the wilderness? The road was nowhere near the route between Portland and their homes. None of them had ever visited that area before, though Peterson and O'Reilly had once gone camping in a different part of the forest as children. Morrison's mother later suggested someone must have chased them up that mountain road, but she couldn't imagine who could have threatened 5 strong, capable men. A possible clue emerged when Detective Reynolds interviewed Joseph Walsh, who reported being stranded on the same road the night of February 18th. After his car got stuck and he suffered a mild heart attack, Walsh spent the night in his vehicle. Around 2 a.m, he heard strange whistling sounds and saw several men and a woman carrying what appeared to be a baby, illuminated by car headlights about 100 feet away. Walsh called out for help, but the figures rushed back to their vehicle and disappeared into the darkness. Later that night, he was awakened again by lights and whistling, but couldn't identify the source. When his car ran out of fuel at 5 a.m, Walsh was forced to walk 8 miles to a ranger station. Along the way, he passed Morrison's Plymouth, but thought nothing of it at the time. Walsh's account aligned with early reports of men allegedly confronting the 5 friends in the university parking lot. Several people at a local diner believed they had seen the group stop to make phone calls, but these leads led nowhere. In recent years, darker theories have emerged. In an online forum post from 2017, someone claiming to be Fisher's sister-in-law shared previously unreported details. She believed the men had witnessed a violent altercation between a woman and several men at the basketball game. When they intervened, it led to a confrontation that ended with Donovan being attacked, prompting his friends to flee in panic up the mountain road. Another detail allegedly omitted from official reports was the discovery of bullet casings at the entrance to the forest road. Had someone fired at their car as they fled? If so, how to explain their stop at the convenience store? This detail only raised more questions than answers. Theories about what happened that February night range from Donovan experiencing a PTSD episode that led them up the mountain, to supernatural encounters in the forest. Like similar cases of mysterious disappearances, this one has generated endless speculation, but few concrete answers. The men, though adults, retained much of their childhood innocence. Except for Donovan and possibly Morrison, they possessed the minds of young boys. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is imagining their fear and confusion during those final days, especially since the full truth of what led to their deaths remains unknown. Their families still hope for answers, particularly about Donovan's fate. For now, the Oregon Mountain mystery stands as a testament to the unpredictable dangers of wilderness and the endless capacity of nature to keep its secrets. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.